Hey guys, tonight we slide a thumb over the switch. The light snaps off and the room grows thick, the kind of hush you feel on your skin. Outside, an entire block exhales, street lamps wink to black, and elevator stalls mid-floor, and the late-night noodle shop becomes a little aquarium of candle glow. Your fridge hum fades, your phone turns into a very expensive flashlight, and curiosity mixes with the tiniest pinch of dread. One cheeky reality check before we get cozy: if a global weeks-long outage ever really arrives, you probably won't survive this without help, humility, and a few unsexy skills. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing our sleepy map light up across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there in the half-dark and name the question we'll carry. What would it actually mean for the world to reset to a caveman existence? Not pelts and perfect spear throws. Put it in practical terms. A reset like that means the collapse of high-energy, high-complexity systems you rarely see, but always use transformers that sip lightning and tame it diesel, that moves food, chlorine that keeps microbes out of your tap, and the tiny chips that tell bigger machines when to wake and cool. When that scaffolding falls, daily life shrinks to muscle, weather, and luck. Your fitness app won't count steps while you're counting firewood, but the workout arrives anyway. That picture isn't literal Paleolithic. Archaeologists would object, and they'd be right, because you don't forget metallurgy when Wi-Fi leaves. A steel pot stays steel. A bicycle remains the lightest freight animal you'll ever tame. What you slide toward is a low-tech equilibrium. Fewer specialists, more generalists, literacy surviving unevenly. Workdays ruled by sun and rain more than calendars. Think post-industrial scavenger craft, not perfect flint napper. You still salvage roofing wire jars tools. Your library is small but stubborn. Your economy contracts to what hands can make and feet can carry. To judge whether that slide is plausible, you sketch triggers, not outcomes. Start with the sky. In 1859, the Carrington Event. A massive solar storm drove currents into telegraph lines so strong that paper smouldered, and some operators sent messages with their batteries unplugged because the aurora itself powered the network. That's a useful mainstream fact, and it matters because our grid today is far wider and more interdependent. Big transformers are bespoke giants. If enough die at once, replacements arrive in months or years, not days. Not every path needs space weather. Life now is software wrapped around hardware wrapped around logistics. A poisoned update in a shared library, a few synchronized cyber attacks, and the flow of antibiotics or diesel hiccups. Add a pandemic that takes drivers out of cabs and technicians off towers and shelves empty faster than rumour. You don't need villains, you need brittle assumptions failing together. Historians still argue whether Viking sunstones were practical tools at sea or charming myths attached to Iceland's spa, but either way, the idea helps. Simple optics can find order in a cloudy sky when your best satellite is wishful thinking. Quirky detour done, and yes, you might end up explaining polarization to a neighbour while juicing a potato to feed a radio. Please don't build an energy plan around tubers. The nuance resets aren't binary. There's the sudden crash blackout exodus barter by the weekend, and the slow skid where service is thin month by month until you wake up living locally. Geography changes the scorecard. A hot, bright city with no groundwater faces different math than a rainy town with gardens and a repair culture. Skill matters too. The neighbour who brews beer can pasteurize water. The friend who fishes reads tides better than any app. The person you joked was the CrossFit guy becomes the human wheelbarrow. Because we're making a bedtime plan, you set a yardstick with 3 legs. First energy: if most of your daily power comes from muscle wood, sun and wind, you can touch you're in reset territory. Second information: if a pocket notebook beats a search bar, recipes, maps, water treatment ratios, who owns the only pressure cooker, you're there. Third safety nets: if your emergency is resolved because neighbours show up, not because a number picks up you're feeling the new normal. The point isn't to catastrophize, it's to measure. If you can boil water, mend clothing patch leaks, and feed 5 people for a week with what's already in your kitchen, you're far from loincloths. Run a quick timeline to turn fog into shapes. At 6 hours, the outage is novelty candles, board games, heroic plans to read more. At 24, your freezer becomes a countdown timer and stews start to make sense. At 48, water pressure sighs and you learn exactly how heavy a litre feels on stairs. At 72, polite streets get edgy after dark and the migration to relatives with gardens begins. A week in tiny medical issues that were routine insulin refills, antibiotics for a dumb cut, become dice rolls you'd rather not throw. None of that equals Caveman. All of it feels like gravity-tugging complexity, down a notch. Now, zoom out and circle the resilience roots hiding in plain sight. Paper manuals matter again. Bicycles become cargo mules. Community corkboards sprout like mushrooms after rain. You sketch a starter notebook, how to boil, filter or chemically treat water, how to build a can rocket stove, which knots bite and which release, where the flat roofs with tanks sit, who can sew and who can weld. Keep one silly reminder at the end of that page. Not every ancient hack deserves a comeback crocodile dung anything stays in the Museum of Bad Ideas. By the time you set the candle in a glass and listen to a city that sounds older than it looked an hour ago, the question sharpens. Could the world reset to literal caveman life? Unlikely. The bones of industry don't evaporate and memory is stubborn. What can happen and has happened regionally is a slip into lower gears, fewer moving parts, more handwork, tighter circles of trust. Your task tonight isn't to fret, it's to map. We'll trace the fragile stacks under your ordinary day, test them against sparks that really occur, and then build toward the practical firewater shelter, food and the social glue that lets sleep come even when the lights do not. You tip a mental Jenga tower onto the table and start pulling blocks named electricity, water, fuel, food, data and money. The trick isn't how tall the tower stands, it's how much each block leans on the others while pretending to be independent. You touch one piece and three shiver. Civilization is basically a Rube Goldberg machine that makes toast invoices and memes usually in that order. You won't go caveman because knowledge and tools don't evaporate, but you can slide into awkwardly low tech if too many of these blocks wobble at once and nobody braces them with simple local fixes. Follow an electron for a minute. It leaves a generator, maybe a gas turbine, maybe a dam, races down high voltage lines, steps through substations and finally hums into your wall. That trip feels silky until a relay misreads a tree, kisses a wire, or an operator stares at a frozen alarm screen. In August 2003, a cascading failure put roughly 50 million people in the northeastern United States and parts of Canada in the dark. Heat sagged lines, software missed the warning, and the grid did what big systems do under stress. It failed together. That's your mainstream fact for tonight, and your reminder that small faults love company. Turn the faucet. That clear stream relies on electricity at intake pumps, treatment plants and distribution stations. The chlorine that keeps microbes from auditioning in your belly arrives by truck or rail. Labs verify safety using reagents that travelled by air. The people who know the plant best drive on roads that need maintenance crews who need diesel. Wastewater rides the same ladder in reverse if lift stations lose power. Basements learn new definitions of downstream. You don't need ominous violins. You need a pencil and a page to draw arrows from clean water to pumps, chemicals, testing, fuel-skilled staff, and then circle the fragile bits you can actually reinforce. Now, pedal to the grocery store Good Choice and look at a cooling aisle that doubles as a geography lesson. Lettuce flew on the jet stream of the cold chain. Milk lived a careful refrigerated life from farm to shelf. Bananas took a long green nap in climate-controlled shipping. If power winks, all that temperature choreography turns to compost. Food is time travel in packaging, and the time machine runs on compressors, diesel, and scheduling software. When one part hiccups, the bullwhip effect snaps a delay. Here becomes an empty shelf, there and dinner plans downgrade from stir-fry to beans in a very creative attitude. Meat trucks the bloodstream of your day. They drink refined fuel that begins at refineries fed by pipelines, tankers or rail. Refineries aren't light switches. There are choreographed furnaces, catalysts, and tall humming towers that despise surprise. If a storm closes a port or a cyber attack dunks a pipeline's billing system bytes, not pipes, you discover that sometimes paying is the fragile part. You don't have to break the spigot when you can confuse the receipt. Light joke number 1. Somewhere a server goes down and someone's coffee gets stronger than safety guidelines. Zoom out to the map under the map fibre optic cables threading cities' cell towers daisy-chained across ridgelines and little boxes called domain name servers translating human words into machine directions. A backhoe that ignores a dig sheet can turn a neighbourhood into a library of Babel. Undersea cable cuts are rare, but when they happen, whole regions reroute like highway detours at rush hour. Latency becomes a mood. Your phone is not magic, it's logistics and skinny jeans. When those jeans rip, even your memes need a rescue plan, which is why a hand crank radio and a printed contact sheet feel suddenly timeless. Money rides those rails too. Not the colourful paper, but the quiet dance of settlement between banks. If networks blink point-of-sale terminals, sulk ATMs, clamp their little mouths and tap to pay returns to its original meaning, you tap your empty pockets and pay with a sheepish smile. The richer irony is this: the more efficient a system gets, the less slack it tends to keep when reality elbows in. Just-in-time inventory is a marvel when it hums, and an empty shelf machine when a hurricane parks offshore. Economists sketch the curve. You pre-position a few bags of rice and call it art. Healthcare wears fragility like a lab coat. Hospitals rely on continuous power sterile water oxygen and supply chains tuned to the hour. Anesthetics are wool fluids and antibiotics often have strict storage temperatures. That fridge holding insulin is a very important box with very short patience. The mainstream truth we forget is that public health equals plumbing plus trust chlorinated water. Vaccination schedules and people believing both work. Remove either, and historically cities wobble. Light. Joke number 2. Your smartwatch can track your sleep, but it can't boil your water, though it will congratulate you for the steps you take to fetch some. Peek sideways for a quirky lesson in resilience. Paris ran a citywide pneumatic tube mail system, well into the 20th century, air-puffing canisters beneath the streets like caffeinated moles. Whimsical, yes, but instructive parallel systems add slack. If email naps, you can still push paper. If fibre sulks, radio stays chatty. Your potato battery, heroic as it is, won't resurrect a data centre, but a hand-crank radio plus a neighbourhood corkboard can outcompete rumour. And while we're revisiting ancient hacks, keep the callback handy: crocodile dung sunscreen stays in the Museum of Bad Ideas. Ports deserve their own candlelit moment. Containers made the world cheap and fast by standardising everything, which means when one standard gets stuck, so does everyone. In 2021, a single ship wedged in a very specific canal jammed headlines for days and delayed deliveries you could feel. The lesson isn't boats are bad, it's that precision is a double-edged sword. A hammer is resilient not because it's smart, but because it's gloriously dumb in all the right ways. Light joke number 3. The cloud is just someone else's computer convenient until it's someone else's outage. At home, interdependencies shrink but get personal. Your gas stove might light without grid power until the utilities compressors need electricity. Your rooftop solar shines heroically until you learn most systems shut off to protect line workers unless you installed islanding gear. Your rain barrel brims until you realise you skipped a first flush diverter, and now you're brewing leaf tea. None of this asks for panic. It asks for mapping. A legal pad with arrows from goal to inputs becomes the friend you consult when the living room goes quiet and your brain tries to sprint in the dark. Culture stacks like a Jenga tower too. If your street runs on trust and favours information outruns fear. If your block party includes a skill swap, sharpening, mending, bike repair, you've shimmed wobbly blocks with human glue. Medieval towns knew this trick, guilds trained apprentices. Feasts reconfirmed bonds and bells signalled help or hazard. We'll file storm-ringing bells under good cardio, questionable physics, but the pattern stands: we knit redundancy with rituals. A tiny modern echo is that folding table at the farmer's market where volunteers teach first aid and swap phone numbers. Hold one compass point as you stand back that 2003 Blackout wasn't the end of the world. It was a diagram of how the world is stitched. Small faults compounded because oversight tools failed and load went looking for somewhere anywhere to go. Fixes since then include the better monitoring, tree trimming and cross-training. Yet complexity keeps sprinting ahead of checklists and cleverness often outruns caution. Historians still argue whether the late Bronze Age collapse was driven more by drought earthquakes, migrations, or the way trade networks snapped when one link failed. The rhyme for you is simple: networks multiply prosperity, and when stressed they also multiply surprise. So you keep the tone practical and a touch cheeky because stress learns from your voice. Print the numbers, stash shelf-stable calories, learn to boil, filter and chlorinate water without asking a search bar. Tag your breaker panel like it's a vintage synth, because in the dark you're the roadie for your own concert. The tower on your table still stands. You can see the joints, the shims and the creaks, and where one deliberate reinforcement tamps the wobble. You won't be a caveman by morning. With luck, you'll be a slightly handier neighbour with better shoes, and that's a plot twist you can live with. You tilt your head toward the sky because the next domino doesn't start in a server room. It starts on the sun, where magnetic fields braid themselves into the temper and then let go. A coronal mass ejection blossoms flings billions of tons of charged particles into space, and a couple of days later Earth slips through the storm like a ship through surf. You don't hear anything. There's no thunderclap, no cinematic beam. You just notice the aurora creeping farther south than it should, as if the planet suddenly installed RGB lighting and forgot to ask your opinion. Here's the shape of the trouble. Those particles squeeze Earth's magnetic field and the field writhes. Long conductors, transmission lines, pipelines, undersea cables pick up slow, relentless currents called GICs, geomagnetically induced currents, the electrical equivalent of a tide that ignores stop signs. Big transformers live at the ends of those lines. They're mighty but moody, and when DC-like currents flow where AC should be, they saturate, overheat, and complain in smoke. The mainstream fact in March 1989, a geomagnetic storm collapsed Hydro-Quebec's grid in 90 seconds, and millions watched the northern lights while their living rooms went dark. A transformer in New Jersey cooked itself into retirement. No villains, just physics with a grudge. You already met the 1859 Carrington Event in a whisper. Now you feel its heat. Telegraph operators in North America and Europe reported shock sparks and the strange party trick of sending messages with their batteries unplugged because the aurora powered the lines. Newspapers boasted that you could read by skyglow at midnight. Quirky tidbit-to-pocket Victorian skywatchers mailed each other hand-inked sunspot sketches like trading cards, and Richard Carrington himself drew the flare that bears his name from his backyard observatory, proof that sometimes science advances because someone couldn't resist staring at the sun responsibly. Okay, you murmur, but does that cook my phone? Less than you fear, more than you prefer? Geomagnetic storms bully big, long things. Your phone is a short wire hiding in your hand. The line from dam to city is a metal horizon that invites trouble. Satellites feel the storm directly, though drag increases, orbits shift, and electronics take particle hits. GPS can wobble at the exact moment you really want it to behave. Down here, if the grid wobbles, data centers switch to backup, then to hope, then to silence. Light joke number 1, your router becomes a very sophisticated coaster that refuses to hold your tea. Now shift to a harsher cousin, electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. A high-altitude nuclear detonation, nobody needs that thank you, splits into 3 acts. E1 is a blindingly fast spike that can punch unprotected microelectronics. E2 behaves like lightning's kid sibling, and most surge protectors and lightning arresters can help. E3 looks a lot like our geomagnetic storm's slow squeeze, so it gnaws at long lines and the biggest transformers. There are also non-nuclear EMP devices with far smaller footprints. Headlines love them. Physics keeps them humble. You don't have to become a bunker catalogue to remember the rule long conductors are fragile, and things connected to them inherit the mood. What fails and what limps? Cars are stubborn beasts. Many tests suggest that most modern vehicles don't die permanently. A few stall, many shrug, and some want a key cycle and stern words. Older diesels with mechanical injection will look at you like EMP, I eat nails. The real choke points remain the same ones you mapped earlier. Grid-scale transformers, substation hardware, long feeders, SCADA gear and the logistics that service them. If those big bones fracture the muscles, homes, shops, clinics, lose leverage, Historians still argue whether the 774-775 CE radiocarbon spike the Miyake event came from an extreme solar proton storm or something more exotic like a distant gamma ray burst. Either way, tree rings whisper that the sky can surprise us harder than we plan for. Mitigation lives in boring words, hardening, grounding, monitoring and practice. Utilities can add series capacitors to block GICs, install neutral blocking devices, segment grids into smaller islands, and rehearse black start procedures so generators don't wait for the permission when the map goes dark. Space weather forecasters watch the sun the way storm chasers watch clouds issuing alerts hours to days ahead. Satellites flare out of safe mode, operators shed load, line crews brace. Your role at home looks homely and reasonable. Unplug what you don't need during a major storm warning. Keep small electronics in a grounded metal toolbox if you're nervous. A casual Faraday closet with a personality, and prioritize radios, lights, chargers, and a paper list of humans you love. You take a gentle detour through pipeline land. Long buried pipes can pick up those slow tide currents, and corrosion protection systems work overtime, which means inspection schedules matter even when your sink still pours. Quirky but useful bits, some long-haul cables and pipelines include countermeasures grounded at intervals like lightning rods laid sideways under the world. You won't fix one with a wrench and a pep talk, but you can respect that resilience often looks like small repeating decisions rather than one cinematic shield in the sky. Light joke number 2. If anyone tries to sell you anti-aurora crystals, save the money for batteries and soup. You picture the aurora again, curtains rippling, edges scalloped while a substation hum drops from tenor to throat-clearing cough. If enough transformers cook recovery means bespoke steel long lead times permits cranes and crews. That's months to years for full replacement if many fail at once, which is why programs that stockpile spares exist tucked away like industrial-scale first aid kits. Printed schematics and paper operating manuals get a second life when screens blink. The monastery copying vibe from earlier returns minus the robes plus hard hats. And yes, your hand-crank radio earns its keep because rumour moves faster than repair trucks. Your neighbours become sensors. One learns to look up NOAA-style alerts. Another listens to amateur radio nets. A third is the power nerd who knows which feeders serve which blocks. Neighbourhoods that pre-plan do better. One meeting where you decide who checks on whom, who has a generator, who owns a chainsaw, and who can make coffee on anything that gets hot, small jokey aside. Number 3. The person who mocked your potato battery demonstration at last year's barbecue will absolutely show up and ask if you have any more of those science potatoes. You smile, hand them a flashlight, and quietly retire the spud from grid duty. The big perspective check matters. A Carrington-class storm today would be costly, chaotic, and weirdly beautiful, but it still wouldn't erase knowledge. It would test manufacturing capacity, international cooperation, and the patience of everyone who discovers that their comfort lived downstream of invisible schedules. It would not drop you into stone tools unless someone also confiscated scrapyards, libraries, and curiosity. The world has eaten shocks before Tambra cooled summers. Krakatoa redrew sunsets. 1989 flipped a continental light switch. Each time people patched Learned and added one more line to the manual titled, "Next time before the sky gets ideas." You end the section with a pocket plan that feels like a lullaby. Keep a small, sane cache of water calories and light. Own at least one radio that doesn't ask the walls permission. Print a few pages that teach you how to chlorinate water and run a generator safely. Label your breaker panel coax cable and the drawer where you keep spare fuses. When you hear that a big solar storm is inbound, unplug the delicate darlings and go watch the sky responsibly. No ladders, no heroic selfies. Just you and a planet wearing a luminous scarf. The aurora waves, you wave back, civilization wobbles, you don't. Somewhere in the back of your notebook, next to the recipe for lentil soup and the sketch of a rocket's hoof, you add a reminder. We're electric creatures in a magnetic world. Your sleep tonight won't banish solar weather or human error, but it will file the knowledge where your hands can reach it in the dark. And if the room does go quiet one evening and the router becomes a coaster again, you'll know the difference between panic and preparation, and you'll choose the second on purpose. You learn that pandemics don't smash infrastructure like storms or EMPs. They quietly pull people out of chairs. A forklift without a driver is modern sculpture. A hospital without nurses is a very bright building, and a semi of milk waits until the driver stops coughing. Shelves thin before beds fill, because demand spikes just as hands vanish. You don't need zombies. You need sore throats, school closures, and delivery routes that suddenly look like riddles. The old ghost that still teaches is the Black Death. In 1347, ships reached Mediterranean ports with more than grain. Within a few years, plague swept across Europe and much of the Middle East and North Africa, killing roughly a third to a half of people in many regions. That's your mainstream fact. Quirky tidbit plague doctors wore beaked masks stuffed with herbs, believing sweet smells filtered bad air. Historians still argue whether rats and their fleas or human fleas and lice did most of the spreading, a reminder that infrastructure can be fur and fabric as much as timber and stone. Even then, shelves thinned before beds in their own 14th century way. Harvests went uncut mills, slowed workshops, lost journeymen. Wages rose in places, laws tried to freeze pay, and villages learned the arithmetic of too few hands. Venice and Ragusa experimented with isolation, holding ships offshore for Trentino 30 days that stretched to Quarantagiorni, 40 days, giving us quarantine. Restraining movement to restrain microbes turned out to be one of history's sturdier ideas. Now slide the frame forward and you're pushing a cart down a bright aisle. A new pathogen rides airplanes. News rides phones. Worry rides fastest of all. People buy in gusts rice beans, soap masks, and for reasons the poets may someday explain, oceans of toilet paper. That's behaviour, not failure, but it acts like a software update on the market. Everything changes overnight. Meanwhile, absenteeism climbs. Drivers call in sick, a plant pauses. A warehouse goes to half staff. None alone is a catastrophe. Together they make tomorrow's shelves look like today's panic. Hospitals don't fail first. They stretch. Oxygen flows, lights burn, but staffing thins and small shortages snowball gloves, gowns, swabs, IV bags. The cold chain for insulin and some vaccines still wants electricity, which we mapped earlier, but now it also wants drivers' dry ice and hands. Light joke number 1. Your smartwatch congratulates you for standing while you wait in a pharmacy line for 40 minutes. You thank it kindly and keep standing. Pandemics trick you because the lights are on. The fridge hums, the router blinks. It feels normal until you need a dentist, an antibiotic, or a replacement part for the well pump the last storm nudged. Then you discover that normal is choreography and several dancers called in sick. Even the garbage truck skipping a week says public health is plumbing plus trust. If a boil water notice appears after a staffing hiccup, you know how a rolling boil or the right tiny splash of chlorine your notebook has the ratio. Here's the quiet math behind those empty aisles. Modern stores lean on just-in-time logistics. A sudden bump, everyone buying 2 months of pasta on a Tuesday empties shelves before backrooms can blink. If the distribution centre is short-staffed, restocking lags. If long-haul drivers are sick, shipments stack up. If a single packaging plant pauses 100 brands feel it because they all buy the same caps or labels. Efficiency dislikes slack, so a hiccup turns into a bullwhip down the line. History keeps a drawer of debates. Historians still argue whether the 14th century death toll owed more to pathogen traits, climate or social structure, urban density, malnutrition, and the trade networks that made cities glow. You don't need the final footnote, movement moves microbes and speed multiplies loops. We excel at speed. We can ship a mango from a continent away at the perfect green. We can also ship a cough across oceans before the thermometer beeps. Practical crossovers belong on the same page as your rocket stove sketch. Hand washing remains undefeated. Masks aren't fashion, but they're teachable and kind. Distance is a dial, turn it as needed. Stagger errands, prefer open air. If you look after someone at home, simplicity beats heroics. Soup, hydration, rest, and a thermometer that doesn't lie. Print a one-page guide for pressure cooker sterilisation, not because you'll run a clinic, but because jars and cloth sometimes need more than hot water. Light joke number 2. Your sourdough starter refuses to help but insists on being named Captain Yeast Sparrow. Supply chains heal with people, sick leave policies that let drivers stay home without wrecking rent, and not charity. They are logistics. Cross-training a warehouse crew so roles can back each other up is not inefficiency, it is resilience. Neighbourhood mutual aid is not cute, It is the shortest road between need and solution. Light. Joke number 3. The friend who mocked your potato battery at last year's barbecue will ask whether those science potatoes can power a forehead thermometer. You hand them spare batteries and retire the tubers from the energy industry. Even small local producers help. A seamstress with a heavy-duty machine becomes a mask micro-factory. A brewery pivots to sanitizer, a makerspace laser cuts face shields. A library posts simple care sheets on a corkboard for people with thin data plans. The lights are on, shelves thinned, neighbours widen lanes so restocking can catch up. Meanwhile, you keep your pantry boring and brave beans, rice, oats, oil, and the spices that make beans feel like a choice. You rotate and date, and you skip crocodile dung cures, saving your budget for soap and soup stock. When the wave ebbs, recovery looks like people stepping back onto their marks. Drivers return shifts, refill schools, reopen, and the elusive O-ring finally arrives with more bubble wrap than dignity. Some changes stick sanitizer at counters a neighbourhood chat that refuses to die and new respect for stockrooms. You don't return to caves, you return to the lesson that complexity works best, with a little slack and a lot of kindness. Keep the corkboard, thank the nurse, keep the label where you can find it in the dark. You leave yourself one last practical whisper before sleep pandemics are not moral tests you pass with virtue. They are logistical storms you ride with care. Your toolkit is small and calm: soap, patience, a mask when needed. A pantry that buys you time and neighbours who know your name. The shelves might thin before beds do, but they thicken again faster when a street learns to hum like a well-tuned, very human machine. You learn that collapse doesn't always hiss like gas lines or roar like a storm. Sometimes it arrives as a cheerful update available, and you tap OK because dinner can't babysit itself. Software brittleness is the quiet cousin of broken bridges, and you live on it. Your bills, your clinic, your traffic lights, your grain silos, and that humble pump that keeps chlorine honest, each one now speaks fluent code. When code lies, steel believes. When steel believes, reality gets opinions, and your day does too. Start with the obvious villain: ransomware. It doesn't knock, it encrypts, and your files become a museum exhibit you can't touch. Then come wipers, the meaner cousins that don't even ask for money. They just erase. In 2017, NotPetya wrote a trusted software update into companies worldwide detonated across networks and bricking machines from shipping desks to factory floors. Maersk, one of the biggest container lines, rebuilt thousands of servers from a single surviving image, a digital scavenger hunt that took them through distant offices to find one domain controller that happened to be offline when the blast rolled through. You feel how bytes into brick isn't a metaphor. It's forklifts, parked ports, idling, and cargo going nowhere. Step sideways to a formative moment. In 1988, the Morrisis worm escaped a grad student's experiment and spread across early internet hosts, forcing emergency cleanups and inspiring the creation of the Computer Emergency Response Team. That's your mainstream fact, and your reminder that we've been practicing this dance for decades. Historians still argue whether the Morris worm marks the birth of modern cyber conflict or just an embarrassing coming of age where the internet discovered it could trip over its own shoelaces and take half the dorm with it. Brittleness isn't only malice, it's complexity leaning on complexity like two tired cyclists. A package manager fetches the library that fetches a sub-library that fetches a mood. In 2016, a tiny JavaScript module called LeftPad vanished from a public registry for a short stretch, and thousands of builds face-planted because everything apparently needed 11 lines of code to add spaces to strings. Quirky, petty, unforgettable civilization paused for white space. You smirk, then you open your notebook and write dependency hygiene. Because the joke stops being funny when the parts truck is waiting on the app that's waiting on the build that's waiting on a function you could write with your eyes closed. Now, drop AI into the stack. The tools are astonishing models that write code, label images, draft reports, and tune logistics. They also hallucinate like champion improv actors stating falsehoods with soothing confidence, and they can be steered into mischief. Misalignment isn't sci-fi, it's the everyday gap between the outcome you intend and the metric a system optimizes. Tell a recommender to maximize engagement, and it may learn to tickle outrage. Tell an optimizer to reduce travel time, and it may invent routes that assume nobody needs bathroom breaks, oxygen, or Tuesdays. Like joke number 1, ask it to schedule lunch, and it proudly assigns your sandwich to the residual while congratulating you on your productivity. The scary bit isn't that AI wakes up cranky, it's that people wire it to levers. If a model writes configuration scripts for thousands of routers, and a subtle error propagates wide areas go quiet while engineers play whacker syntax, if a scheduling engine that allocates nurses, technicians, or train crews drifts off spec, you discover that optimal can mean nobody gets lunch and the night shift doesn't exist. Big industrial control systems, the pumps, burners, conveyors are increasingly wrapped in software and dashboards. When telemetry lies, valves obey the lie. You aren't back in caves, you're in bright rooms where numbers are persuasive and alarms, if trained badly, learn to hush themselves. So you picture a very boring Tuesday. A supplier's code signing certificate gets stolen, an update rolls. Your municipal water utility applies it because trust is the only way to keep up. Hidden inside is a backdoor someone snuck in. Screens, smile, then fib. A pump runs dry, heats and complains in the language of bearings. The room smells hot, then expensive. The fix isn't a superhero, it's culture and architecture, least privileged segmented networks, manual overrides within arm's reach, and tabletop drills where the plant chief can say, "Pull that breaker now," and everyone knows which lever why and what to write on the clipboard afterward. Let's talk memory, not your brain, the planet's cloud-soaked external one. Data centers hum with mirrors and backups, yet too many small outfits still keep one copy of everything under the same roof as the coffee machines. Fires, floods, and whoops, we overwrote the archive, turned bytes into absence. The 3-2-1 rule 3, copies 2 media, 1 offsite isn't folklore, it's oxygen. Offline backups tape still soldiers on shine, when malware prowls because air gaps are hard to sweet talk. Like joke number 2, the day you truly need yesterday's backup is the day your external drive decides. It identifies as modern art. Tape paper and second locations are the boring heroes. Here's a cosmic footnote for your pillow. A stray high-energy particle can flip a bit in memory. In 2003, Belgian election officials traced a mysterious 4096 vote glitch to a likely cosmic ray bit flip into an electronic counting system. Reality occasionally edits your files with a space laser. ECC memory and checksums exist to say no thank you. You won't buy a data center for your living room, but you can treat your own records with the same respect 2 backups and a printed copy of the few things you'd cry about losing. Paper is the low-tech sister of the cloud, and she doesn't crash when the aurora shows off. Supply chain security sounds like a boardroom acronym until you trace it to your kitchen tap. Who audits the code in the device that lets a treatment plant technician log in? Who reviews the dependencies in the billing software that, if frozen, keeps fuel sitting in tanks because receipts won't reconcile? In 2021, the Colonial Pipeline shutdown wasn't a physics failure of pipes. It was a business systems freeze that rippled into fuel lines and patient tempers. Harden the boring apps and the exciting machines behave. Ignore the invoice server and you end up rationing gasoline, which is a very expensive way to learn accounting. Can AI help here? Yes, if you leash it with humility. Let models draft, but make humans review. Use anomaly detection to spot weird behavior in pumps, payments, or passwords, but never remove the manual stop. Put guardrails on code generation, require stage rollouts, and teach your systems to fail safe and loud. Treat generative tools like very energetic interns, brilliant fast, and capable of spectacularly confident nonsense. And remember our potato battery from earlier. It still won't power a server farm, but it will power the science demo where you explain why paper copies matter. Light. Joke number 3. If someone asks whether the potato can run the water plant, you nod solemnly and say, "Only during harvest. Your home and street get the bite-sized version of all this." Write down the router admin password on paper, not just in a notes app you can't open after a reset. Keep a spare modem in the old ISP box in a closet tagged with cables like a tiny museum exhibit. Export your contacts, recipes, and critical docs to a thumb drive, then another, then give one to a friend across town. Print the how-to pages you can't fake in a hurry, water treatment ratios generator, safety pressure cooker times. Printers work beautifully the day before you need them and sulk majestically the day of. Print when the lights are friendly. Zoom out and you see the same pattern you met with storms and plagues. Interdependence without slack is drama looking for an audience. Bytes shape bricks when code touches actuators. Bricks bruise bytes when floods eat closets of servers. You don't fear keyboards, you expect failure kindly and stage the exits. You label the breakers you practice, the overrides you babysit, updates with tea and a plan, and you keep one copy of the important things far enough away that a single bad day can't snatch them all. You end the evening with a practical shrug. The world won't reset to Caveman because a spreadsheet sneezes. It resets to crankier modern when we wire everything too tightly and forget to leave ladders for climbing back out. Knowledge remembers, tools endure, make your systems more like a hammer, useful, gloriously simple in the right ways, and very reluctant to surprise you, and you'll sleep, even when the next update available is wearing a little too much cologne. And if someone brings up crocodile dung remedies for cybersecurity, you smile, turn the page, and invest in backups instead. You wake to a sky the colour of pewter, the sun, a shy coin you can stare at without blinking, as if the planets secretly turned down the dimmer switch to mood-lighting melancholy. The air tastes faintly of matches. Chickens look offended. Your garden stares back like a quiz you didn't study for leaves raw-edged from cold blossoms, stalled soil, clumping because yesterday's warm rain is today's sticky chill. You pull on a sweater that smells of stove smoke and think if weather is the pulse, climate is the blood pressure, and tonight it's low. Volcanic winters do this. A mountain sneezes sulphur into the stratosphere, sunlight scatters and distant fields pay the bill. Mainstream factor anchor the feeling. Mount Tambora erupted in 1815, and the next year became known as the year without a summer across parts of Europe and North America. Frost in June, crop failures, and grain prices climbing like nervous squirrels. Diaries complain of yellow noon and hungry months. Your little patch of kale, which normally lectures you about resilience, considers bolting purely out of existential drama. Light joke number 1. The sun looks like it's on power saver mode, and you definitely did not agree to the terms and conditions. Lean harvests don't announce themselves with fanfare, they just refuse to show up. Wheat waits for a stretch of warm that never settles. Pollinators get confused by the off-tempo bloom, and a late frost wanders through like a clumsy houseguest, touching everything you bragged about to neighbours. You count calories the way people count minutes at the end of a shift. Beans go from side dish to strategy. You remember the cold chain sermon from the grocery aisle and realise the oldest cold chain is a root cellar. Earth steady cool shelves for jars, a notebook for rotation, and a promise to your future self, written in pencil: do not eat the seed stock in January. Mini ice ages aren't single frozen blocks, they're ragged quilts of cool decades that bite in different places. Climatologists and historians still argue whether the Little Ice Age was one coherent global period or a patchwork of regional jolts stitched together by poetry and misery. What you feel is the local version shorter growing seasons, grumpier, storms rivers, icing over more often, and the cultural pivot that follows. Norse Greenlanders whose farms perched at the edge of comfort saw colder seas and thinner hay. Historians still argue whether climate trade shifts or rigid social choices toppled their colony first. But the moral for your pantry is the same when margins shrink. Flexibility feeds you. You add a quirky tidbit to your mental pantry: Scandinavian families during 19th century crop failures sometimes baked bark bread, bulking scant flour with inner pine bark. Not tasty, not recommended, but a reminder that creative starch is older than ramen. You can do better without chewing a tree. Potatoes, which once crossed oceans and revolutionized lowland diets, shine in cool spells. Millet and buckwheat rush from seed to plate before a moody autumn remembers it's supposed to be winter. Beans climb corn in the Three Sisters pattern and quietly fix nitrogen while they gossip with the wind. Your notebook grows arrows from lean year to short season varieties, cold frames, and stop pretending peppers like your latitude. Volcanoes aren't the only puppeteers. Oceans hum their own long songs, El Niño La Niña, tilting rain here and stealing it there. Monsoons arrive late. Snowpack under-delivers. A river that once wore a confident blue chooses a hesitant brown. In the 1930s, a drought met ploughed to the horizon fields on the North American plains, and the Dust Bowl was born wind-lifting topsoil into black blizzards, families packing for anywhere that looked less haunted. The map you drew for power and water now gets the new layers. Soil shades slope, and the way a street's wind turns a tomato plant into a flag. Your daily moves change quietly. Mornings become reconnaissance check, the squash for cold burn, the gutters for storm grit, the barrel for yesterday's inch of rain. A cheap min-max thermometer tells you who froze while you slept. You mulch like someone trying to keep secrets, trapping moisture and soothing roots. You stick hoops over the beds and stretch a skin of plastic to build a microclimate that ignores the calendar. A rocket stove sips twigs. A haybox cooker traps heat so your stew keeps working while you save fuel. Light. Joke number 2. The sourdough starter files for seasonal effective leave, leaving you to eat pancakes and contemplate your life choices. Preservation stops being a hobby and becomes a time machine. You slice and dry apples onto metal screens. You blanch greens for the freezer when you have one, or for pressure canning when the grid is grumpy. You ferment with salt and patience because lactic acid bacteria are the friendliest little bodyguards your cabbage will ever hire. Salt matters in this climate math. So does vinegar, sugar and smoke. A backyard dehydrator that looks like a child's drawing of a greenhouse turns afternoon sun into winter texture. You learn the old rule with new respect: vegetable heavy in summer, starch heavy in winter fats, treasured year-round. Water teaches you manners. You catch roof runoff in barrels you first flush to keep the leaf tea out. You bury clay pot zollers near thirsty plants so moisture leaks where roots can sit. On slopes you cut little ditches swales to slow rain so it thinks before it runs away. In truly stingy seasons you decide which beds earn the bucket. A mulched potato hill is a different promise than a thirsty corn patch, and the former feeds more mouths for fewer litres. Somewhere in the margins you scribble, grow calories, not just vitamins, then add a heart next to herbs because happiness counts too. Culture shifts with weather. Festivals drift to celebrate what actually grows, not what the calendar once promised. Barter boards feature jars of pickles crunch quantified in lids. A neighbour who fishes teaches you to clean a catch without drama. Another trades eggs for bicycle repair. Even storytelling adapts. Mount Tambora's gloomy summer nudged writers to invent storms on paper. One vacation by Lake Geneva famously turned into ghost stories, among them a little tale about a scientist and his stitched-together creation. Your street probably won't produce a literary classic, but a potluck where each dish honours a staple that stores well-beans, grains, roots, becomes both dinner and rehearsal. The debates keep you honest. Historians still argue whether the Irish potato famine's deadliness owed more to blight alone or to political economy that turned a crop failure into catastrophe. The Dust Bowl's lesson: plough less, plant windbreaks, respect grass feels contemporary. You apply it at pocket scale, don't strip your soil, plant hedges that break wind and feed birds, keep compost working like a quiet factory behind the shed. A shovel plus time equals black gold. You never say dirt again without apologising to the soil. When cold bites longer than expected, clothing becomes infrastructure. Wool refuses to stop being miraculous. Layers trap little pockets of weather you can control. A warm hat is basically a bandwidth upgrade for your body. Indoors, thermal mass stone water containers, even a wall of filled jars smooths temperature swings. You hang quilts over doors like friendly fortresses. Light joke number 3. You finally accept the stylish truth that long underwear is just a hug you wear under your pants. You think about trade. In lean years, regions lean on each other. Coastal places send saltfish and seaweed. Inland places send grain and fat. When modern trucking burps rivers and bicycles keep secrets moving sacks, barrels, bundles, you label everything with the calm of a clerk in a monastery scriptorium because winter is a filing system disguised as a season. Remember the libraries without power notion. Your pantry shelves are a library too, and every jar is a book that lets you read August in February. Some nights while wind rubs the house with cold hands, you laugh softly and remember the museum of bad ideas. Crocodile dung sunscreen never protects lettuce. It will not protect you. The potato battery remains retired from the energy sector. though the potatoes themselves are quietly brilliant at storing sunlight under your bed in an old crate. If a kite of rumour says the climate has always done this, you respect the grain of truth in the sack of nuance. Yes, climate wiggles. No society doesn't always wiggle gracefully with it. Yes, preparation helps the dance. Lean harvests don't shove you into caves. They invite you back to practical circles, seed soil season, storage story, and to neighbours who know what grows on a north wall. The question that started your night reset to caveman keeps shrinking. What looks like a reset is often a re-ratio, fewer miracles outsourced to money, and more skill returned to hands. When the sky goes pewter again tomorrow, and the sun puts on its shy coin act, you'll walk your beds, check the barrels, rotate the jars, and count your winter. Not by fear, but by stacks of solved problems that taste like beans, roots and relief. You widen the frame from dim harvest to the big cinematic dice, the sky rocks and earth boilers that don't check with calendars. Low probability, high impact sounds, like a finance seminar until you picture a bright winter morning over Siberia and Chitwerd. Bird startled, reindeer quiet, and then a sun that isn't the sun. A fireball blooms, the air buckles, trees fall like matchsticks in rangy spirals. That's your mainstream fact anchor, the Tunguska event. June 30th, 1908, atmospheric explosion that flattened roughly 2,000 square kilometres of forest-scorched bark and left no obvious crater because the culprit likely disintegrated in the air. Loggers later walked out to a landscape combed in one direction as if a giant had thoughtfully tidied the taiga. You've met Tambora's long shadow. Count that as the Earth's deep drum. Volcanoes are wildcards that ignore borders and RSVP as ash, sulphur and stories. Krakatoa in 1883 turns pressure into poetry and panic, the blast heard thousands of miles away, shockwaves circling the globe, sunsets painted so lurid that artists wondered whether the sky had learned to blush. Lest you assume these are museum pieces, you remind yourself that stratovolcanoes still dot shipping lanes, and skylines and caldera systems, Yellowstone Long Valley, campy flurry nap with one eye open. Historians still argue whether supervolcano headlines teach caution or just sell fear, but the scientific shrug is practical eruptions happen on geologic time, not election cycles and preparedness budgets yawn when the ground looks calm. Asteroids get the movie deals, but most of their visits are shy. In 2013 over Chelyabinsk, Russia, a 20-metre space rock arrived uninvited, exploded high, and a shockwave raced across windows with perfect aim for brittle glass. Roughly 1,500 people sought treatment, almost all for cuts from flying shards. That's a useful modern reminder in many Skyrock episodes the main hazard is not fire from heaven. It's your windows auditioning as confetti. Like joke number 1, if the cosmos insists on throwing a surprise party, it never brings tape for the streamers. You bring the tape on your window seams. Now tug the camera back 66 million years to a coastline that will someday be called Yucatan. A larger rock arrives, ocean leaps sideways, dust climbs into the stratosphere, and Dinner for Dinosaurs becomes a long, dim planetary we're ordering in. You're not a dinosaur. You have soup and neighbours and pressure cookers. Still, it calibrates the scale. Not all rocks are Chelyabinsk. The fat-tail part of the curve, the rare monsters, exists. Now our species survives by making those odds even smaller with telescopes, surveys and plans we hope to keep permanently theoretical. Quirky tidbit for the Pillow-medieval and early modern Europeans collected thunderstones, polished stone axes from earlier cultures, believing they fell during lightning storms. Cabinets of curiosity displayed them as sky gifts. The intuition wasn't wrong about impacts coming from above, it was just misfiled. We've always tried to read calamity with whatever index we had. Today's index includes near-Earth object catalogues and survey telescopes that turn the night into databases, and yes, spreadsheets can save you from rocks with opinions. Volcano wildcards come in flavours. Explosive cones throw ash that sabotages lungs, engines and sunshine. Flood basalts ooze for ages and rewrite climate slowly. Subglacial eruptions lace ash with meltwater mischief. After Eyjafjallajökull, you pronounce it that volcano in Iceland that ate the flight's European skies went unnaturally quiet in 2010, while ash drift forecasts learned to stop assuming and start calculating. The practical effect is the same lesson you met in the grocery aisle. Small particles in the wrong place turn industrial choreography into interpretive dance. Earthquakes demand equal time. There are not wild cards so much as cards we pretend are wild until they arrive on schedule. The New Madrid sequence of 1811-12 rattled the central United States so hard that stretches of the Mississippi reportedly ran backward for a moment, and church bells rang in cities 1,000 miles away. You don't predict the day, you pack the kit strap, the heater, and know your gas wrench like a friend's birthday. Historians still argue whether cascading failures, droughts, sea raiders, or simple network fragility did the most work in the late Bronze Age collapse, but earthquakes in that cocktail likely stirred trade routes as rudely as any rival. So why does preparedness lag when the syllabus includes space rocks and mountain explodes normalcy? Bias hums a lullaby, yesterday looked like today, so tomorrow will too. Political cycles reward ribbon cuttings, not warehouses of filters you pray to neglect. Tail risks feel mathy and far. Potholes are both literal and now, and coordination has a flavour of tragedy of the commons. The benefits are diffuse and delayed. The budget lines are specific and today. Light joke number 2, selling boring boxes full of things you won't need. If we did our jobs right is a marketing challenge. Maybe we should call them mystery boxes and include a sticker. You don't need capes, you need checklists that ignore spectacle and love physics. For ashful masks that actually filter N95-ish goggles, tarps for gutters, and a habit of keeping water topside because ash turns treatment plants cranky. For glass, happy shockwaves, a few minutes of tape and plastic on window panes buys you fewer cuts and less sweeping. For earthquakes, low shelves, latches, and a map of shut-off valves you can find by feel. For the very rare skyrock we catch early, the plan might be hilariously simple. Stand away from glass at the predicted time because curiosity throws shards faster than bravery catches them. Remember our retired potato battery. This still won't power a volcano, but the potatoes themselves, cool, starchy, humble, will keep you and a neighbour fed while airports negotiate with ash. At the civic scale, telescopes and seismometers are the grown-up version of your hand-crank radio sensors that swap rumour for measurement. Near-Earth object surveys expand coverage of the faint and the fast. Radar paints shapes. Planning papers sit in drawers with phone trees attached. Volcano observatories sniff gases, read ground tilt, and type advisories that feel boring, until boring is the difference between evacuation and explanation. Historians still argue whether the Toba eruption 74,000 years ago squeezed early humans through a genetic bottleneck, or whether climate and immigration painted a more complicated picture. Either way, a single mountain can nudge the speaker's ledger, which makes funding the mountain watchers sound less like anxiety and more like arithmetic. You give yourself permission to separate spectacle from risk. Gamma-ray bursts and nearby supernovae live in the astronomy lecture plus shrug category. Spectacular, mood-altering, but unlikely to ruin Tuesday at your latitude. Geomagnetic storms, remember our luminous scarf in section 3, are more probable and already on your checklist. Asteroids. The small ones sneak in. The big ones are noticeable far enough out to argue about deflection. Volcanoes. Some rumble for months, first a kindness you repay by reading the notices and not inventing your own crocodile dung ash remedy. Light joke number 3, if anyone sells anti-meteor crystals, pass. By duct tape water jugs and beans that don't judge you. The personal posture you settle into is the same one you've been sowing through these nights. All hazards calm. A week of water and calories, masks that do more than accessorize, a roll of plastic for windows, a broom that isn't shy, a habit of checking 2 sources before you sprint anywhere. And neighbours always neighbours, because one ladder, 3 people and a shared thermos turn ash on a roof from threat into chore. None of this tips you into Caveman. The bones of our age remain steel books, bicycles, and a memory that writes itself down. Big wildcards can knock shelves, paint skies, and make poets earnest. They don't erase wrenches, recipes, or the friendly muscle of a block that practices together. When the rare dice clatter, you won't curse the cosmos for ignoring your schedule. You'll tape a window cover, a barrel check, a valve, boil a pot and make an unglamorous joke while the world finishes being dramatic. Then you'll sleep because tomorrow needs hands, not headlines. You stand in a quiet room where the loudest thing is paper. The router is a coaster again. The cloud has gone on a long walk without telling you where, and suddenly your most advanced device is a pencil with infinite battery life. You look around and realise that a library doesn't mean a building. It means a habit, what you choose to keep where light and fingers can reach it when electrons refuse to cooperate. Start with a shelf you can carry. One binder becomes a seed bank for knowledge tabs, for water heat, food, health tools, maps and people. Underwater you slide in a printed chart of boil times, filtration options and chlorine ratios. Plain unscented, no surprises. Under heat you tuck plans for a rocket stove's safe ventilation rules and how to test a chimney with a mirror and common sense. Food holds pressure canning tables, fermentation basics, and a one-page cook-by-memory sheet that turns beans and grains into something your future self won't resent. Health keeps first aid one-pagers, when to use pressure, when to wash and wait, when to escalate. Tools holds bike repair diagrams, knots that behave, and a drawing of your breaker panel labelled like a treasure map. Maps means actual paper streets, trails, canoe lines, plus a marker that won't cry in the rain. People is a phone tree on paper, the names of neighbours with skills and a list of who checks on whom after the first windy night. Make pages that survive puddles. Print double-sided on acid-free, lignin-free paper. Slip high-use sheets into cheap plastic sleeves. Laminate a few wallet cards with chlorine math radio frequencies and the pressure cooker times. Pencils outlast pens in rough weather. But if you love ink, use pigment-based archival pens that don't fade to nostalgia. Toss silica gel packets in the bin. Humidity is the librarian that never sleeps. Light joke number 1 lamination is just a raincoat for shy paper, and tonight your recipes are introverts. Knowledge has a way of shrinking and hiding in pockets. Thumb drives and SD cards weigh nothing. Store scans of manuals, maps, and how-tos. Then treat them like the finicky pets they are. 2 copies, 2 different brands, 2 different houses. If you kept a tiny e-reader with a solar panel in that metal toolbox, you call a casual Faraday closet. Congratulations, you just taught electrons to behave politely when they're to return. But make sure your fallback isn't only digital. Screens nap. Paper yawns and waits. When you think libraries without power, you're really thinking libraries like before. Mainstream fact to ground you. Medieval monasteries kept scriptoria where scribes copied texts by hand and the Carolingian push for clearer handwriting. Carolingian minuscule made reading faster and preservation sturdier. In a world of flickering candles, legibility was a technology. You can borrow that wisdom without the tonsure adopt house style for your binder. Clear headings, consistent margins, numbered pages, and an index card at the front that says exactly what lives where. Let your letters be large enough that a nervous neighbour can read them by the light of a grudging candle. Copying isn't only nostalgia, it's insurance. A neighbourhood scriptorium night sounds silly until the power's been out for a week. Sit around a table with tea and copy the essential few. A first aid page, a water page, local maps with landmarks marked, and the contact list. 2 people read, 2 people write, everyone cross-checks. Children illustrate the margins with conifers and bicycle pumps. You've just created redundancy with warmth. Light joke number 2, call it a zine and charge a jar of pickles per issue. Suddenly you're a sustainable publisher. There's a delightfully quirky path between paper and Miracle Optics microfilm. During the Siege of Paris in 1870, messages were photographed onto tiny film and flown out by carrier pigeons, pigeongrams, then enlarged elsewhere. You don't need pigeons in PE class, but it's useful to remember that text can be miniaturized, stored densely, and read with nothing more than a lens and daylight. Hand-cranked microfilm readers still exist. A bright window and a simple magnifier will do in a pinch. On the other end of the spectrum, some optical discs marketed as M-discs promise 1,000-year durability under good conditions. Marketing is optimistic, physics is patient, and redundancy is your friend. A library is also a room full of skills. Run a monthly Teach Me Tuesday knife sharpening, sewing a button that refuses to quit repairing a bicycle brake without tears. Record the steps on a page and add it to the binder after each session. Now one person's trick becomes everyone's morning. Build a seed library too. Envelopes labelled with variety year and store stories beans from Mrs. Thu's balcony. Excellent with lime and salt. Saving seeds is a literacy that tastes like soup. Historians still argue whether Europe truly fell into a single dark age of knowledge loss, or whether the period was a patchwork of regional transformations with plenty of bright rooms. Either way, the communities that copied and taught kept the flame steady. Be one of those. Guarding the past includes rescuing it from itself. Vellum and rag paper age gracefully. Cheap wood pulp pages from the late 19th and 20th centuries crumble like pastry. If you inherit a fragile manual interleave, acid-free paper store, it flat copy it calmly. Palimpsest's medieval pages scraped and overwritten sometimes kept ghosts of earlier texts that modern imaging revived. The Archimedes palimpsest famously revealed lost treatises. Your version is simpler. Write lightly in margins, never over the important bits, and keep a blank notebook for notes, so the original can be a time traveller, not a victim. Catalogues matter more than collections when your search bar is a rumour. A shoebox card catalogue is quaint until it's fast. Sort by topic, then by task. Colour code tabs with tape you can see by lantern light. On the corkboard, keep a "you will want this" at 3 a.m. Section the shut-off valve map, emergency frequencies, nearest spring, nearest clinic that runs on daylight, and who owns the only pressure canner. Light joke number 3 under 3 a.m. Add how to relight the pilot light and polite things to say to a smoke alarm that believes in you. Not every library is words. Keep diagrams, exploded views of pumps, stoves, bikes, because pictures cross language like bridges. Keep recipes that uses what actually sits on your shelf. A binder full of truffle oil, dreams, is very pretty and almost useless. Keep a calendar of sun and season planting times likely frost the wind's bad moods. Keep stories too. Oral history is a batteryless hard drive. If someone on your street remembers how their grandmother cooled milk in a clay pot wrapped in wet cloth. The desert's evaporative fridge. Write it down, try it, and add a photo by daylight. Your nostalgia cabinet should include radios and the words they like. Print a sheet with local FM/AM stations, weather bands, and the amateur radio repeaters near you. If someone on your block has a license pencil, their call sign next to a promise, we check in after storms. Radio's a library of voices that travels when roads sulk. Your hand crank set doesn't judge your push-ups and it eats no Wi-Fi. Pair it with a little glossary of lingo so plain speech stays plain. The pitfalls are easy to dodge if you name them. Don't let all knowledge live in one house or one binder. Fire and spilled tea have no ethics. Split sets with neighbours, stash a sealed envelope at a friend's place across town. Copy the contact tree and maps more often than you think necessary, because paper breeds only when it's overdue for recycling. And retire the crocodile dung solutions with the dignity of bad ideas that taught us caution. Our potato battery still isn't powering anything important, but the page explaining voltage amperage and why wires get warm will earn its keep the day a neighbour tries to reinvent electricity with a fork. When power returns, don't shelve the habit. Update the binder. Add the lesson. Archive the silly myths in a back pocket so future you can laugh kindly at present you. A library without power is not a museum of lack, it's a workshop of patience. It says, "We remember how." And that sentence whispered on a windy night while you thumb to the page that tells you exactly how much bleach goes in a barrel is the opposite of Caveman. It is civilization handwritten. You start with the element that turns bad nights into manageable mornings' fire. Not bonfires that brag, small disciplined heat you can trust. You gather a trinity tinder kindling fuel, and you build upward like you're tutoring a shy flame in confidence. Tinder is anything that catches fast cotton balls with a whisper of petroleum jelly dryer. Lint you saved in a jar, thin curls you shave from a dry stick into feathered spirals. Kindling is pencil-thick wood that refuses to argue. Fuel is the grown-up stuff, split logs that show pale, dry faces, not soggy divas. You leave space for air because fire is picky about breath. You treat sparks like students start them low, shield them from wind, feed them in sentences, not paragraphs. Light joke number 1, the flame doesn't need your entire memoir. Just a short, encouraging note and some tidy sticks. Ignition is a menu, not a miracle. Matches live in dry tins. Lighters keep a second life in every coat pocket. A ferro rod is honest, showers sparks for years if your wrist remembers the scrape. Batteries and steel wool feel like witchcraft the first time, touch glow then flame, but you save that for last because it chews through gear you might need later. Magnifying lenses work when the planet agrees to sunlight. You remember the triangle heat fuel oxygen, and you add a fourth corner judgment. Indoors judgment means ventilation, and a carbon monoxide detector with fresh batteries. Outdoors, it means clearing a safe ring, windside smarts, and water in reach. Your notebook already has rocket stove sketches. Tonight you try a Dakota firehole, 2 small pits, joined underground so air feeds, the flame smoke stays modest, and heat hugs your pot. Fire ties to humanity's long memory. Mainstream fact to anchor your quiet effort evidence at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggests controlled use of fire by early humans around 1 million years ago. Burned bones and plant ash tucked deep inside where wildfire couldn't stroll. Historians still argue whether cooking began that early, or whether later sites like Gesher, Benut, Yaakov in the Levant circa 780,000 years ago mark the more reliable start of habit rather than experiment. You don't settle the debate. You coax your own small fire into the realm of certainty, a little tongue of order in a night that misplaced its chords. Water comes next always. You walk the house like a polite thief and find what's already yours. The water heater's tank, a quiet metal savings account. The toilet's tank, not the bowl. Ice in the freezer becoming tomorrow's cups. Canned foods whose juice is really a drink. You fill bathtubs and buckets when outages announce themselves. You seal lids label date. For treatment you pick the method that fits the moment. Boiling is honest, a rolling boil for a full minute longer. If you live high in the mountains, then cool with a lid. Filters with proper pore size and carbon stages polish muddy sources into something persuasive. You pre-filter through cloth if the water looks like a memory of a rain gutter. Chemistry as a grown-up tool, commercial tablets follow their labels. Plain, unscented bleach is a super. Your printed ratio card has the exact drops per litre for clear and cloudy water. And calcium hypochlorite pool shock makes a strong stock solution you then dilute with care. Quirky tidbit to tuck on the shelf if you ever find yourself with soup-worthy hot stones in a wooden bowl. Many indigenous peoples practice stone boiling, dropping heated rocks into water to cook or pasteurize without a pot that can touch flame. Your version involves stainless steel and fewer splinters, but the physics is cousin close. Shelter is where the night learns your name. You choose an inner room, small insulated, away from big panes of glass. You hang quilts as doors roll towels into snake-like draft stoppers, and pitch a tent indoors if you have one. Smaller air volumes mean your breath does useful work. You designate a safe heat zone. Candles become staff, not celebrities. Sturdy holders, wide bases, never near drapes and never unsupervised. Those viral terracotta pot heaters look cosy. You let the internet keep them. They don't add meaningful heat, and they do add risk. You pass. Battery lanterns and headlamps become heroes you never risked crediting before. Light. Joke number 2. The headlamp turns every room into a spotlight interview with your own laundry. Embrace the drama, fold the shirt. Cooking belongs where fumes can leave without asking. Outdoors under a cover or on a balcony with a crosswind or under a vent that actually vents. Never charcoal indoors, never a generator in a garage. Never a gas stove running just for heat. It's like inviting carbon monoxide to sing lullabies you don't wake up from. You keep a small extinguisher at hand and a lid for every pot. You rehearse the choreography of remove heat, smother flame, breathe, reset until your body knows it without your mouth having to remind it. You mark one table cold prep and one hot zone so turning your back never turns into a scolding. Hygiene is the quiet gatekeeper. You set up a 2-bucket hand washing station, one with soapy water, one with clean rinse and a towel that gets to be special. You ration paper goods with grace and curiosity cloth rags that wash a little line across the room that turns clothespins into a chorus line. Toilets can be old friends. A bucket of grey water can coax a flush when the tank is sulking. If sewer service is compromised, or you're unsure, you switch to lined buckets or a simple composting setup with sawdust to bury smell and time to turn waste into something soil can understand. You never mix human waste with rumour. You follow real instructions because pathogens aren't impressed with improvisation. Your binder holds the page, your nose tells you when to reread it. Sleep and warmth build each other. You dress as if warmth were a schedule base layer, to move moisture away middle layer, that traps little air pockets outer layer that blocks drafts. Wool remains rudely competent even when damp. Hats matter because your head is a skylight. Socks matter because morale does. You warm a metal water bottle near the fire and wrap it in a cloth to make a foot rocket of happiness in the bed. You learn how to bank a fire to last into the grey hour, how to close dampers without strangling draught, how to crack a window just enough that flames purr instead of sulk. You slide. Heat sinks, stone bricks, water jugs near stoves, so they sip excess heat and give it back later, while every smoke and CO alarm gets a little tap like you're checking in on an old friend. Light organises time. You adopt lantern hours, not scroll hours, and time changes flavour. You read aloud, so one light serves 3 pairs of eyes. You write your plan the night before, so the morning greets you with a checklist, not a guessing game. You plan for boredom as a real hazard. Games and pencils and a stack of "we never got around to this" mending jobs become ballast for your mood. Light joke number 3. Somewhere between hour 2 and hour 5 of candlelight, the potato battery retires again with honours, and the potatoes themselves apply for workers' dinner. Neighbours thread through all of it. A check-in schedule morning and evening keeps worry from pacing. Someone is fire watch for the block, someone else has the best kettle, someone knows exactly how to coax vintage stoves into civility. You share firewood etiquette like it's a neighbourhood constitution cut split stack, and don't burn the green stuff unless theatrical smoke fits your decor. It doesn't. You swap skill for skill. You keep a shared bucket brigade plan written in large friendly letters. Myths try to hitch rides on anxious nights. You keep the museum of bad ideas closed. No crocodile dung remedies for burns. No gasoline as kindling, no. I saw a video where a guy used this mystery powder. You practice the 3 tests, does physics like it, does history like it, and does your common sense like it. If any 2 say no, the third is probably being polite. You keep your humour dry and your socks drier. And before you exhale into sleep, you insert 1 more historical pin so your plan feels older than panic. In 1854, during a cholera outbreak in London, physician John Snow suspected contaminated water and famously persuaded officials to remove the handle of the Broad Street pump. Cases fell in that cluster. The exact causal web remains a classroom debate. Historians still argue whether the decline owed more to timing than to that single handle. But the lesson you borrow is unambiguous. Clean water is civilization's pulse, and simple local actions shut this valve. Boil that pot save more lives than speeches ever will. So your first weeks are not a cinematic sprint back to caves. They're a measured walk through 4 pillars, firewater shelter heat held up by judgment, patience, and a little comedy. You label the breaker, you bank the coals, you set the kettle, you wash your hands, you tape the window you already promised to tape, and you sleep in layers with a plan at arm's reach. The world outside can wobble. Inside you stack small certainties until they feel like a roof. Breakfast stops being a meal and becomes a strategy. Calories are chores you eat, and you plan them the way you planned fire and water, small, repeatable, seasonal. Spring is shoots and sigh greens. Summer is abundance with a stopwatch attached. Autumn is ladders, baskets, jars and lists. Winter is the library you can chew. You're not chasing some fantasy of pure caveman keto. You're building a menu that respects weather habitat and the fact that good stew is also morale. Light joke number 1. Salad is just water wearing a leaf costume fine as a hat, but not much of a coat. Foraging starts with a rule tattooed on your patient's know before you nibble. You get a local field guide paper because your phone may be busy being a flashlight, and you learn 5 slam dunk edibles with no lookalikes. Dandelion leaf flower, root plantain, the sidewalk healer, not the banana chickweed purslane and wild onion garlic if your nose agrees. You learn the deadly doppelgangers, 2 water hemlock and poison hemlock keep their own museum wing, and you never ever wing it with umbel-shaped plants. The universal edibilities test you saw online asks you to gamble time you won't have. You pass. You forage with ethics, never take more than 1/3 of any sort of patch, skip roadside plants dusted with heavy metal romance and leave roots unless the plant wants you to pull them. Your binder gets a page titled Seasonal Snacks with sketches and habitat notes in big friendly letters. Protein wears many faces, most of them smaller than your heroic imagination. Big game is fantasy and risk, small game is calories per mistake. Snares and figure-4 deadfalls are old tools, but you practice with sticks and carrots before you bet dinner on a perfect notch. Fish are honest teachers. A handline, a few hooks, split shot, and patience will beat a trophy mindset most days. Panfish, perch, and modest trout are the solid accountants of a river. Set lines where legal funnel traps for crayfish and bottle traps for minnows turn waiting into arithmetic. Light joke number 2. Fish do not care about your personal brand, they care about worms, shadows, and whether you just stomped like a marching band. Storage is where you buy time with physics, drying thin slices, moving air and screens that keep flies humble. Smoking cool smoke for flavour and dryness, hot smoke for dinner. Salting draw out water, invite benign microbes to rethink the menu. Sugar and vinegar, osmosis and acid doing tiny magic tricks in jars. Fat confit keeps cooked meat under a seal of its own softened armour when cold weather helps. Fermentation vegetables recruit lactic acid bacteria to guard them. A crock becomes a quiet fortress that burps contentedly. Pressure canning takes the low-acid foods and persuades them to sit on a shelf safely. You follow the tables, not your cousin's blog. Root cellars even improvised an earthen pit and insulated box on the north side, a basement corner with a draft-tamed turn potatoes, carrots, beets and cabbages into winter's playlist. Your earlier rocket stove now partners with a haybox cooker. Bring a pot to a boil, nest it in insulation, and let trapped heat finish the job while you save fuel. You're running a kitchen that moonlights as a modest physics lab. Here's a mainstream anchor to comfort you during World War II. Victory Gardens provided a staggering share of produce. In the United States, estimates from 1943 hit roughly 40% of the nation's vegetables from backyards, schoolyards, and vacant lots. That wasn't nostalgia. It was logistics with a shovel. Your little beds nod approvingly. On the quirkier shelf, remember that Romans adored garum fermented fish sauce in such volume that coastal factories perfumed entire neighbourhoods. Amphorae of the stuff travelled like salty telegrams across the empire. You smiled because your kraut crock is the same principle with fewer complaints from the neighbours. Fat is fuel, flavour and survival math. You render quietly slow heat, clean jars, labels that don't lie. Tallow and lard store calories compactly and turn plain beans into dinner with a plot twist. Nuts. If your climate is kind, become autumn's piggy bank, acorns leached of tannins, walnuts, hazelnuts, peanuts where frost is kind. Seeds, sunflower, pumpkin, sesame go from garnish to strategy. Grains and pulses become your specialist's rice for storage and predictability, oats for warm bumbung bowls, wheat for bread when yeast cooperates, lentils for speed, chickpeas for stews that make you forgive the weather. You keep spices because morale has a tongue, and one jar of cumin can make beans remember foreign vacations. Hunting's trees sell heroics, history sells tools. Pemmican dried lean meat pounded with rendered fat and sometimes berries was a high-energy shelf-stable marvel used by many indigenous peoples of North America, and later by fur traders who learned to respect the recipe. It's the original energy bar without the wrapper, guilt-tripping you in the trash. Fish sauces, salted fish, air-dried stockfish, hanging like laundry in Nordic wind old methods, hum the same tune, remove water, add salt or acid guard against air and keep things clean. Historians still argue whether early farmers in Europe shifted to dairy first, and then evolved widespread lactase persistence, or whether their tolerance and their cows co-evolved in a tighter spiral. Your pantry merely notes that yogurt and cheese are portable milk with better manners. Now the paleo diet myths knock politely. Eat like a caveman, they say, as if caveman were one menu with a QR code. In truth, Paleolithic diets were wildly regional and seasonal coastal shellfish. Feasts, savanna tubers cooked in ash nuts and berries, insects, small game. Occasional big winds that fed many mouths and honey raids that made joy. Residue on ancient grindstones shows starch grains. Burned plant bits on hearths whisper tubers and seeds. Historians still argue whether wild grains and starchy roots were staples or strategic supplements before agriculture. But nobody serious imagines a single macronutrient religion. Your modern pantry follows their lesson, not the hashtag eat what grows, what swims, what stores and what you can replace without collapsing the neighbourhood. Seasonality teaches humility. Spring greens are vitamin confetti but low on calories. You pair them with fats and grains so they land softly. Summer begs you to be a manager, harvest early, and often blanch and freeze when you can dry the rest and keep fruit flies from writing their memoirs in your kitchen. Autumn is a verb: dig, cure, can ferment and barter. Winter is discipline, rotate stock, respect first in, first out, and keep one shelf as a do not eat seed and starter. Banker with a smiley face that means future. You'll cry if you cheat. Light joke number 3. Label jars like you're writing for your forgetful nemesis, because you are. Fishing, foraging and small game ask you to think like habitats. Water after rain runs muddy. Fish hunt edges. Crayfish hide under rocks you can lift with one polite lever. Mushrooms love patterned chanterelles with their forked blunt ridges and apricot perfume oysters stacked like bookends on logs. You never chase the tricky families until the human teacher signs off. Birds gift you eggs long before they gift you themselves. A modest coop becomes a breakfast machine that fertilizes your beds and eats your kitchen mistakes. Rabbits turn weeds into protein with suspicious efficiency and require secure housing because every predator read the same handbook you did. Salt is the metronome of preservation. You buy it by the sack when times are easy because in lean times, salt is both ingredient and currency. Vinegar you can brew, sugar you can grow or trade. Salt you plan for. Containers matter 2 glass for acids and clarity food grade buckets for bulk dry goods. Mylar with oxygen absorbers when you want years, not months. Moisture is the enemy, so are rodents with PhDs in gnawing. You store high, you store sealed, you store in more than one place because tea spills and roofs weep. And you keep the museum of bad ideas closed. Crocodile dung sunscreen does not become crocodile dung spice rub. It remains an exhibit you visit only for jokes. The potato battery remains retired from the energy grid, though the potatoes themselves sit happily in your cellar, like polite thunderclouds of starch. If rumour brings miracle fasting as famine wisdom, you answer with slow, steady meals and shared tables. Famine is not immoral to prove it's a storm to outlast with math microbes and neighbours. When you lay down tonight, you've moved the question again. Caveman, a competent mammal with a pantry, yes. You've mapped where calories hide in your place, learned to borrow summer for February, and chosen methods that turn perishables into patience. Tomorrow, if the shelves look thin, you'll still eat on time, and you'll send a jar next door because community-like fermentation bubbles best when the lid isn't screwed down too tight. You feel it first in the sound of chairs scraping across a school gym, floor, rubber feet squealing thermoses, thumping pencils clicking like tiny woodpeckers, soup steams in a line of mismatched mugs along the stage. A whiteboard waits already smudged with arrows and hopeful exclamation points. The grid has been flaky long enough that neighbours have become names, and names have become a roster. Tonight you don't talk about beans or batteries. You talk about rules, the quiet scaffolding that keeps a street from fraying when everyone's tired and the night is longer than the extension cord. You start simple because simple survives. Quiet hours posted big. Kitchen fire hours when stoves get priority for ventilation and everyone knows whose chimney to borrow. A common corkboard with a barter column rice for bike tubes, sewing for kerosene, or sharpened knives for pickles. Price lists feel tacky, clear expectations feel like warm socks. You set up a watch rota pairs, never solos, 2-hour shifts, reflective armbands that don't look like a militia cosplay. You add whistle codes, 1 short for help, 3 short for fire, 1 long for come see this potato battery because it's adorable but still not a generator. Light joke number 1, congratulations, you have accidentally invented a very friendly HOA without the snarky letters with better soup. Barter works until it doesn't. You discover the classic snag: you have eggs, they want socks, but the sock person wants lamp oil. You can either invent time travel or invent a token. So you choose script handwritten chits numbered, signed by 2 people, redeemable at the weekly market table for staples the group buys in bulk. Or you try a time bank: an hour of mending equals an hour of gutter cleaning equals an hour on watch. If anyone's eyebrows climb, you remind them that money is just an agreed story with a resume, and your story now fits in a shoebox with a ledger and a stamp pad scavenged from the craft drawer. History pulls up a chair like a helpful elder. Mainstream fact to anchor you in 930 CE. Iceland's Althing met at Thingvellir, a broad assembly, where chieftains and free farmers gathered each summer to recite laws, hear cases, and settle disputes. The law speaker stood on the law rock and recited statutes from memory, because paper was expensive and memory was a civic muscle. You borrow that muscle. You read your street compact aloud, every meeting, water rules, kitchen, safety watch, rota, dispute steps, so the rules live in mouths, not just in the binder. The page gets dog-eared. The words grow familiar, the temperature in the room drops from edgy to workable. Quirky tidbit for a smile and a caution medieval England, tracked debts with split tally sticks notched, hazel rods split in half so each party held a matching record. They were used for centuries. In 1834, a cheerful plan to burn old tally sticks for disposal fed 2 hot fires in Parliament stoves and helped set the Palace of Westminster ablaze. Your moral is gentle and practical, simple record-keeping is powerful, casual bonfires near rules are memorable. Keep your chits in tins, not in toasters. Enforcement. The word everyone avoids gets handled the way you handle stoves with ventilation. You write graduated steps on the whiteboard where emotions can see them. Step 1, a gentle word private. Step 2, a written note on the corkboard. Clear factual, no accusations. Step 3, a small circle, 2 neighbours and a timer where the person explains fixes or compensates. Step 4, temporary restrictions. No night watch must trade only at table prices, always with a path back. You reserve the phrase rough justice for what happens when you skip steps, and you choose not to skip steps because panic and pitchforks are like gasoline near curtains, dramatic, brief and instantly regrettable. You keep one line in all caps, no one acts alone. The hue and cry tradition communities responding together to real threats gets a modern, kinder cousin that prefers whistles to yells and notes to rumours. You learn to use circles, not mystical, just chairs and a ring where everyone sees everyone, and the kitchen timer is the only tyrant. You try restorative questions, what happened, who was affected, what can be done to repair. The results feel unspectacular, which is exactly the point. Drama is for storms. Governance should feel like laundry, regular, necessary, oddly satisfying when folded well. Like Joe? Joke number 2. Yes, you enforce no crocodile dung solutions with the same seriousness that you enforce no gas stoves as space heaters, because both are violations of physics and dignity. Leadership becomes a hat that travels. You rotate facilitators. You separate roles, one person keeps time, another writes notes, a third keeps the queue fair. You publish the agenda a day ahead on the corkboard, and by word of mouth so meetings don't become open mic nights for your neighbour's 10-minute soliloquy on the moral failings of squirrels. You create a tiny council of now 3 people empowered to make immediate safety calls, fire water, shut off medical evacuation between meetings with automatic review at the next gathering. The council has no cape, just a whistle and a clipboard. Law from below isn't new. Medieval merchants evolved a web of customs called the Lex Mercatoria merchant law that lets strangers do business at fairs and ports using shared rules, quick arbitration and reputations that travelled faster than ships. Historians still argue whether Lex Mercatoria was a coherent independent legal order or a later gloss on a messy patchwork, but the flavour you borrow is clear, simple contracts, clear penalties and fast decisions, and the understanding that a bad actor loses access to the network, which hurts more than any fine. Your block's market table becomes a tiny fair with posted weights, posted measures, and a humorously oversized no thumb on the scale sign. You also formalise kindness. A mutual aid board lists who needs what this week, meds picked up, roof patching childcare during clinic runs, and a Skillshare Saturday keeps passing hands-on knowledge forward. You declare 2 amnesties, one for hoarded cans of food that want to be soup, one for grudges. Both expire on Sundays after potluck. You keep a sealed envelope labelled break glass for humour, a few dumb jokes, a doodle of a potato wearing a cape, a note that says breathe. Light joke number 3. You pass a motion that every meeting must end with one good pun. It's amazing how few arguments survive a solid groan. Security gets rules because fear loves improvisation. No masks on watch unless smoke or ash dictates no solo confrontations, no backyard heroics. Watch logs are boring on purpose time place observation action initials. Boring logs win arguments with excitement later. If strangers arrive, you offer water warmth and boundaries. You post the guest rules right next to the kitchen safety sheet, so hospitality doesn't have to debate security every time feet hit the stairs. Script tokens and ledgers invite their own museum of bad ideas. Counterfeits, favoritism, the temptation to print more because reasons. You build in checks. 2 signatures to issue public posting of totals and a monthly audit done by people who are not the issuers. You cap any one person's credit so nobody buys the moon with promises. You prefer staples for redemption, so tokens don't morph into lottery tickets for luxuries that make neighbours cranky. Customs grow like vines around these trellises. The bell for the hour is an old skillet on a nail. The weekly thing you let the Norse word sneak in meets at dusk. Everyone brings 1 candle and 1 suggestion. You repost the water ration chart whenever weather turns theatrical. You add little seals of approval tested at the rocket stove, approved by the bike crew, verified by the first aid team. So advice carries provenance, not just volume. The debates that thread through your new normal keep you from smugness. Historians still argue whether early village councils were egalitarian problem solvers, or stages where the loudest and richest practiced dominance with smiles. You watch for those shadows and write rules that keep airtime honest. You protect the microphone for the quiet neighbour whose rain barrel saved 3 gardens. You note who always volunteers and make sure they get to rest, because burnout turns heroes into ghosts. You build a rule that every rule expires unless renewed, so nothing calcifies into silliness. Then one evening you realise something gentle. The question that started as will the world reset to Caveman has turned into how does a block become a town without losing its manners? You're not painting cave walls, you're posting minutes. You're not trading shells, you're signing chits and keeping them away from stoves, thank you very much. The smell in the gym is still soup and pencil shavings. The whistle hangs by the door like punctuation, and your street sleeps easier. Not because danger vanished, but because trust got names duties and a schedule. You stack chairs, flick the headlamp to red for the walk home, and hear the quiet click of a latch behind you. The sound a neighbourhood makes when it remembers how to keep promises. You notice it the way you notice the scent of cinnamon from a kitchen down the block. Soft, then everywhere. After rules and rosters come stories. Someone ties a ribbon to the skillet bell for luck. Someone says the Wednesday kettle should whistle 3 times so the week remembers to behave. Someone lines up jars by colour because it keeps the beans calm. You smile, but you also recognise the ancient move your street is making. When the world feels wobbly, people braid scents from habits. Rituals are calendars you can touch. Taboos are fences you draw around real dangers so nobody stumbles in half asleep. You give the habits jobs. The dusk whistle isn't magic. It's the hour when everyone checks stoves and embers. The first pancake goes to the house with the newest baby, not because syrup has cosmic powers, but because sleep-deprived parents shouldn't also do dishes. You're no open flames after quiet hours rule gets a small ceremony. You snuff a candle together. Name 3 things you were grateful for and everyone walks home with their headlamps set to red. The hush feels deliberate instead of nervous. Light joke number 1. Somebody suggests we bless the potato battery for bountiful volts. You pat it fondly and keep it retired from the priesthood and the power grid. Meaning-making can steer away from cliffs or drive straight toward them. You keep the steering wheel by naming the good uses first. A first fish back right returning the first catch to the water helps you enforce conservation without a lecture. A seed blessing day in spring is a seed swap with cookies labels and a promise to share saved seed at harvest. You hang a tiny no-blame charm on the water cork board. If a filter fails or a jar spoils the spell, says you fix the process, not the person. You let ritual carry the social weight so your whiteboard can stay factual and boring, which is all a whiteboard ever asked to be. History sits close enough to hear. Mainstream fact to anchor your caution in 1215 the Fourth Lateran Council forbade clergy from participating in trials by ordeal. No more hot iron handles or boiling water tests as divine lie detectors nudging courts toward testimony and evidence instead of spectacle. Rituals had been asked to answer questions. Physics answers better. The pendulum swung. You borrow the lesson. When the kettle fizzles, you don't accuse a gremlin. You check the jet for soot. When the bread flops, you don't blame the phase of the moon. You feed the starter and adjust the water. Though yes, the moon is free to attend your sourdough's graduation. Taboos sprout where risk hides. Fire lives in one corner. Fuel never stacks taller than your smile. Nobody siphons gasoline with their mouth because stories travel faster than ambulances. Children don't fetch water alone. Knives get sheaths, and a small solemn this edge is a promise lesson. You discover why many cultures wrap danger in narrative the tale sticks when the memo doesn't. Anthropologists still debate whether food taboos and similar rules grow mainly from ecological constraints, protect the scarce, avoid the risky, or from identity work. Mark who we are by what we don't do. You don't need a referee's whistle. You need a rule that keeps fingers and friendships whole. The quirky shelf in your mental library gets a new exhibit coarsened, a medieval English ordeal by blessed bread and cheese, if the accused choked guilt was presumed. It's weird and vivid. It also reminds you not to outsource truth to theatrical snacks. Your block chooses a nicer cousin, the cheese vote a literal wheel that spins to choose the next facilitator so leadership can't take root in the same two chairs. You learned in the gym that hats should travel. The cheese wheel keeps travelling too preferably towards someone who hasn't spoken yet. Then there are the brittle stories that bloom in disaster's shadow. Cargo cult tales from the 20th century Pacific after wartime airfields and supply drops vanished showed people building bamboo radios and clearing runways, rituals that tried to coax abundance to return by repeating its visible shapes. You hold that example carefully, with respect for the communities who were adapting with the tools they had, and you draw your modern moral copy causes, not costumes. Airplanes landed because factories, fleets, logistics and weather aligned, not because a tower had a certain hat. Your neighbourhood translates that we get water because filters, seals and time on task align, not because we chant at the spigot. Light joke number 2. If anyone proposes a ceremonial dance to appease the router ghost, you can dance if you want to, but also check the breaker and the ISP status page first. Ritual can anaesthetise harm too. Scapegoating is a timeless hobby. When shelves thin rumour hunts for culprits with simple faces, outsiders witches, the guy who builds rocket stoves too well. You inoculate with process. The 3 questions ritual: what happened, what do we know, what do we do next, beats a bonfire every time. Historians still argue whether the intensity of Europe's witch hunts owed more to climate stress during the so-called Little Ice Age, to confessional conflict, or to local vendettas weaponized by courts. You don't need a winner to practice the antidote slow down, verify, and never let fear appoint judges, meaning also heals. Grief wants choreography. You create small rites for losses, a candle on the windowsill for an hour when a block elder dies, a square of cloth with their favourite food drawn in ballpoints stitched into a neighbourhood quilt that warms the gym on cold meeting nights. You plant a memory row of fruiting shrubs by the fence, names on slate berries shared by everyone. It isn't mystical. It's the physics of morale. People who feel held hold better to each other. Festivals return before reasons do. You invent First Jar Day. Everyone brings one preserved thing and a story about the day it was made. You borrow a page from the Pacific Northwest potlatch tradition, the great gift-giving feasts that once redistributed wealth and status along the coast, careful to honour, not appropriate. A mainstream footnote: Canadian authorities infamously banned potlatches in 1885, a prohibition that lasted decades. Communities kept customs alive anyway. Your version is humble surplus becomes script-free gifts on a long table, and the only status awarded is a wooden spoon that reads most helpful hands. Redistribution rides ritual like a well-made sled. Myths sneak in through humour, which is why you curate jokes like tools. The Museum of Bad Ideas hosts crocodile dung sunscreen with a little brass plaque right next to terracotta candle heaters and potato battery as municipal power. You laugh on purpose because laughter builds antibodies against nonsense. You also keep a shelf for ore that doesn't require credentials, a star map taped to the wall, aurora sketches from that geomagnetic night, a list of constellations with the old names and the nicknames your block invents. Light joke number 3. Orion's belt becomes 3 tightened hose clamps and nobody can unsee it, which is perfect. Taboos get sunset clauses. You agree to review every we don't do X rule each season. Maybe the no night fishing ban made sense when the footbridge was wobbly. Once fixed, you lift it with a little ceremony, a bell ring, a cheer, a fish-shaped cookie. Bad taboos shrink under sunlight. Good ones earn their keep and get poems. Your binder grows a rights and reasons section, where each ritual gets a one-line purpose, dusk whistle, old ember, check plus head count, because memory is sturdy until it isn't. You give yourself permission to keep symbols light and tools heavy. If someone wants to tie a ribbon on the rain barrel after a good downpour, tie away. Just also clean the first flush diverter, because leaf tea is not a sacrament. If a neighbour swears by lucky socks on a watch, wish them luck, and make sure the whistle hangs at the same height every time. The lamp of reason stays lit under the lantern of tradition, and both make a kinder room. By now you can feel the drift of the original question. A caveman reset imagines the loss of meaning as much as of machines, yet you're marinating in meaning-friendly, functional woven to task. You don't paint bison by torchlight, you paint tick marks on jars and sew quilts with names. You still have steel pots, bicycle bearings, and a whiteboard that prefers check marks to epiphanies. You add songs that are basically reminders with rhymes. You tuck kids into bed with the same story each windy night. Once upon a time when the lights forgot us, we remembered each other and made tea. Your last gesture before sleep is small. You set the kettle and touch the ribbon on the skillet bell, not for luck, but for memory, which is luck's responsible cousin. You do not fear ritual, you keep it on a leash. You do not mock belief, you marry it to checklists. If myth is the blanket the mind pulls up against the cold, you stitch yours from tested threads, work-shared rules spoken, jokes ready, and a very retired potato battery sitting proudly in its glass case. A totem of how far you've come from confusion to comfort. You look at your hands and realise they're already a toolkit thumb, as vice nails, as scrapers' knuckles, as rulers that remember inches by feel. Civilization climbs back up the ladder, the same way it did the first time, not with miracles, but with charcoal dust under the nails, clay underfoot, and neighbours who don't mind the sound of a hammer at dusk. You don't aim for a museum-perfect forge, you aim for useful metal and repeatable steps. Stone to copper to bronze to iron is less a timeline and more a menu. You'll order what your place can actually serve. Start with heat, because without it, everything else is exercise. Charcoal is just wood that's learned minimalism carbon after the smoke leaves. You build a simple charcoal clamp, a low dome of split dry wood stacked tight, covered with damp earth and a few vents you can plug or open. Or you nest a small barrel full of dry sticks inside a larger vented barrel, a retort that turns wood into polite black bones, while the outer fire keeps nosy oxygen away. You watch the smoke shift from white steam to blue-grey chemistry, then to thin dun. Light joke number 1, congratulations, you have invented artisanal darkness pairs. Well, with everything stains absolutely everything. Clay is your second co-conspirator. You dig a little knead a lot and temper it with sand-chopped straw or crushed already fired pottery grog so it won't crack when it meets heat. From clay you shape tuyères, the nozzles that breathe air into fire-line forges, and when you're ready, raise a small bloomery furnace. Picture a waist-high clay cylinder as wide as your outstretched arms, with a little tap arch near the bottom, and tuyere holes a few inches above that. You'll feed charcoal and ore from the top like a very picky fireplace. Air is your spell. A hand-crank blower double-bag bellows, or even a bicycle-powered fan shoves breath into the coals until heat passes from enthusiastic to glowing authority. Ore isn't always a mine. You walk creek banks with a magnet rescued from an old loudspeaker and collect black sand magnetite. You watch for orange armour on rocks and wetland edges, bog iron nodules that regrow over decades as groundwater delivers fresh iron. The quirky but useful shelf gets a note some Norse communities harvested bog iron on repeat, a renewable-ish ore, if you're patient and are polite to wetlands. You can also ore the modern world rusted rebar-busted lawnmower blades and scraps that say FE with their weight. Galvanized zinc-coated steel stays out of the fire for a week. Zinc fumes are the opposite of ASMR. Your fluxer helper that grabs junk and makes glassy slag can be crushed limestone or even seashells burned to a quicklime and hydrated back to sanity. The furnace run is a rhythm. Preheat with a charcoal-only burn, then layer a scoop of ore, a scoop or two of charcoal, a handful of flux, repeat, 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 while the air hums like a contented animal. Hours pass in bellows time. Slag drips, hisses, and occasionally needs tapping out the arch. When the furnace gives that particular deeper note, smiths know it by heart. You open the belly and haul out a glowing sponge of metal and slag called a bloom. You carry it politely with tongs and friends to an anvil stand, maybe a chunk of rail, a sledgehammer head sunk in a stump, or a sacrificial anvil plate, and you persuade it with the hammer into cohesion. Hot fold hammer, brush, repeat until the slag spits out and the iron decides it's one piece. It's sweaty alchemy, the kind that turns neighbours into a crew. Mainstream fact to pocket while you breathe, the big leap from charcoal iron to industrial iron in Britain rode on coke coal baked into a cleaner fuel, famously used by Abraham Darby at Coalbrookdale in 1709. You're not rebuilding Coalbrookdale. You're rebuilding the memory that came before its small furnaces, local fuels tools made to fix more tools. Historians still argue whether the early spread of iron in the Eastern Mediterranean happened because tin for bronze grew scarce after trade routes hiccuped, or because iron, despite being fussier, was simply more available and good enough once smiths learned to tame it. Either way, adoption followed logistics, not legends. Before iron, you practice with friendlier metals. Aluminum melts in a charcoal furnace with a decent blower. You cast it into sand moulds, place sand plus a touch of clay and oil, makes green sand for ladles, brackets and machine handles. Brass and bronze, if you can rustle copper and a little zinc or the tin pour like honey and machine easily, just treat fumes with respect and distance. Pewter is almost polite. You avoid lead unless you're certain of your alloy and your ventilation beaky, because brains are precious and fumes are rude. Casting teaches you pattern draft angle, and the humble art of risers and vents, so your pieces don't shrink into sadness. Iron wakes up under the hammer. Wrought iron from a bloom is tough low carbon, and welds to itself if you heat it to bright yellow and sprinkle a little silica-rich sand as flux. For edges, you want more carbon. You can cheat in charming historical ways, pack iron in a sealed clay box with ground charcoal bone or leather scraps carbon, and a pinch of nitrogen and heat for hours case hardening that makes the skin steelier. Quench basics, follow normalize by heating to a non-magnetic red, and air cooling to soothe stresses. Quench in warm oil or brine for hardness. Temper back the brittleness in an oven or by watching oxide colours pale straw for very hard to purple and blue for springy. Quirky footnote for the giggle file. Old smithing notebooks sometimes recommend quenching in special waters from brine to stale urine, two dubious potions as if nitrogen and mythology were roommates. Your version uses science and a safe place for splashes. Light joke number 2. If someone swears their blade must be quenched under a full moon in yak tea, you nod, check the clock and use the oil. Tool tools. Bootstrap tools. Your first wins are nails, hooks, hinges and chisels because wood without iron is half a language. You build a bow drill and then a treadle drill. You turn a wooden lathe from a bicycle hub and a pedal so you can shape dowels and cups. You build a rope walk, a 30-foot alley with hooks and a crank to twist twine into real rope. Cordage starts in weeds, nettle, yucca, inner bark of basswood and becomes a currency of its own lines. Nets, slings and belts that make hands stronger than they are alone. You stitch bellows from canvas and scrap leather wax the seams with beeswax, and realise you've learned to move air like a musician. Workshops become the new temple sawdust on the floor, a chalkboard of jobs and a coffee can labelled loner bolts. You host a weekly hammer-in where 3 stations hum a brake drum forge with a hand crank blower, a rivet table that turns scrap into joints and a mending bench where file handles, knife scales and tool grips get wrapped and pinned. Your maker fair is a repair fair. Every object that returns to service is a small refusal to slide backward. Light joke number 3, you institute a neighbourhood fashion line Forge Couture, which is just aprons that still smell faintly of onions but now have extra pockets. Clay returns in walls and kilns. You stack adobe or cob clay sand straw into honest mass that holds heat through the cool nights. You fire simple earthenware tiles to roof the shared shed. You mix a primitive refractory from clay grog and ash to build a small crucible furnace that doesn't sulk at bright orange. If you're lucky enough to have iron sand on a beach, you build a Tatara cousin, a long low furnace that eats charcoal and beech and breathes out Tamahagani-like blooms. You can fold into steel for tools that make your grandparents nod from wherever they are. Measurement sneaks back calipers from sheet metal squares from straight-grained wood with iron tongues, plumb bobs that turn gravity into a co-worker. Gears arrive not as watchmaker jewellery, but as wooden teeth pegged into wheels that lift water or grind grain when a stream gets bossy. Windmills and treadle wheels translate legs into torque. You rediscover that a bicycle is a universal joint with opinions. Safety rides shotgun because eyes don't grow back. You keep a bucket of dry sand by every forge, and you treat quench tanks with the respect you once saved for laptops. You post a sign over the anvil, no galvanized, no mystery metal. You hang ear and eye protection like communal spoons, wash, share, repeat. The Museum of Bad Ideas adds indoor motor oil quenching right next to crocodile dung sunscreen, and the retirement display for the potato battery, which is now posing proudly in a little glass case with the caption, "Not the grid never was." The debates keep you honest while your hammer sings. Historians still argue whether pattern welding in early medieval Europe was mostly about performance combining different steels for resilience, or about workshop tradition and beauty signalling mastery. Your blade cuts rope either way, and your respect goes to the hands that learn to read heat by colour and sound. You don't chase romance, you chase repeatable, safe, fixable. That's grit, and it shines better in daylight than in legend. By week's end, the gym-turned-council hall is also a smithy on Thursdays, a sewing room on Fridays, and a bike clinic on Saturdays. You've rebuilt a tiny piece of the ladder, charcoal clay cordage bloom forge file fit. The question that used to wear a pelt caveman reset now wears an apron and a grin. You won't recreate an age. You'll invent a functional neighbourhood with steel nails, sharp hose hinges that don't squeal, and a bellows that sighs like a sleeping animal when the fire slips to coals. Complexity is back, humbler, friendlier, and close enough to mend with a wrench. You decide the best time to build lifeboats is while the ship is floating, and while the band is still taking requests. Safeguards aren't bunker decor, they're shortcuts through future bad days, the way a spare key taped under the planter is a shortcut through forgetfulness. You plan them in layers house block, town world, so no single fuse stands between you and a warm bowl of, "We're fine." Seeds come first because they are time capsules with salad inside. Your pantry gets a cold, dark, dry corner jars with gasket lid silica gel packets that you recharge in the oven. Paper envelopes labelled with variety and year. You treat seed like you treat backups, 3 copies, 2 places, 1 friend who is compulsively organised. Mainstream fact to anchor the idea the Svalbard Global Seed Vault dug into Norwegian permafrost opened in 2008 to store safety duplicates of the world's crop seeds, a planetary spare key for agriculture. Your street scale is humbler, but rhymes a community seed library in the gym, envelopes traded at spring blessing of the beans, and a promise to return seed in autumn, so the drawer never goes empty. Light joke number 1. You label 1 jar, "Do not snack." Future corn, because midnight you is persuasive. Electricity gets the same layered love. You don't try to outgrid the grid. You build a micro-gridlet that can island when the big one sulks. A modest array of panels, an inverter charger that knows how to say no to backfeeding lines, a transfer switch, and a critical load sub-panel where you've moved the champion's fridge a few outlets, the modem for the days when the internet also remembers you. Batteries sit like polite elephants, vented, strapped with fuses that judge you. A small quiet generator waits outside with a locking cable, a carbon monoxide alarm inside, and fuel you rotate like canned peaches. You print a 1-page startup shutdown sheet and tape it above the system because panic and checklists are mortal enemies. Your earlier lesson returns, most rooftop solar arrays go dark in outages unless designed to island, so you choose gear that knows when to stand alone and when to dance with the grid. Blocks can build bigger. 3 rooftops, 1 alley, and a carport become a neighbourhood. Microgrid. DC strings converge in a shared battery shed with a laughably large fan and a simple rule: medical loads first, then fridges, then lights keeps everyone honest. One house loans roof, another loans storage space. The third loans the neighbour who actually reads manuals. You add a crankable, pedalable generator in the gym that charges a community battery during movie nights. Child labour is banned, but child enthusiasm is a renewable resource if you turn it into a game. Like joke number 2, you name the battery Griddy McGridface and it performs better when praised. Radios are the nervous system of your safeguards. You keep a hand-crank solar radio that hears weather local AM, FM and Gold Star shortwave. You copy emergency frequencies onto a laminated wallet card. One neighbour gets their amateur licence, then 3 more catch the bug, and suddenly a Sunday net exists. Check-ins and plain language relays for folks behind hills, and practice passing radiograms that sound like Telegram's competent cousins. You hang a little rubber ducky antenna on a nail by the door like a hat, and promise to make 2 calls after storms, the first to your out-of-area contact, the second to the local net. Radio is social scaffolding you can build with wire, patience, and tea. Paper returns as blueprint and cash. You print the things that turn panic into tasks: generator steps, watermath first aid 1-pagers, shut-off, valve, maps, pressure canning tables, and contact trees. You print your house wiring diagram and draw the critical loads in cheerful highlighter. You print the battery charging voltages the installer warned you never to forget. Then you store a second set across town because Smoke is an ungrateful archivist. For deep storage, quirky tidbit silk escape maps issued to Puu airmen were waterproof, silent and easy to fold maps on fabric beat paper in the rain. Your version is a small blueprint printed on Tyvek or tucked into a zip bag with a pencil that's always sharp because it lives in a pencil sharpener. The Museum of Bad Ideas still displays crocodile dung sunscreen. Do not add only in the cloud manuals next to it. Knowledge caches grow beyond recipes. You burn a neighbourhood thumb drive twice a year, PDFs of manuals, first aid guides, water treatment, bike repair, seed saving, and a folder titled Grandma's Greatest Hits, with recipes, measurements, and the story of how she knew when bread was done without asking the oven. You keep 1 copy at the gym, 1 at a friend's place, and if you're feeling long now, an archival disc in a tin with a cheap magnifier. Scholars built the Rosetta Project's micro-etched nickel discs to store thousands of pages without power. You won't machine nickel in the garage, but you can think like archivists, redundant, durable, legible to strangers. Historians still argue whether the Library of Alexandria vanished in a single catastrophe or a long shrug of neglect. Either way, your antidote is simple copy share, and don't keep all the wisdom next to the toaster. Food and water caches shift from prepping to pre-positioning. The block rents a small locker like a very boring dragon's hoard, filters, bleach, gloves, tarps, a few spare regulators and hoses, a roll of flatching for roof boo-boos, and a tote labelled Market Day kit with a scale, script, stamp ledger and hand sanitizer. The clinic in a box lives there too. Gauze tape, SAM splints, tourniquets, a blood pressure cuff that doesn't need Wi-Fi, and a printed sheet titled Do This First. You box boredom as well. Cards, crayons, a library of zines you made at scriptorium night, and a frisbee. Because morale is a survival metric. Municipal safeguards matter more than hashtags. You ask your city about spare transformers and mutual aid agreements. You push for water towers that can run in manual mode, not just in the embrace of SCADA screens. You vote for budgets that stockpile critical parts the way Svalbard stockpiles seeds. You champion resilient transit bikes, bus lanes, protected footpaths, because gasoline has moods. After storms, towns with libraries that open on daylight, parks that drain well, and community kitchens that can run on gas or wood look almost smug. The smugness is earned. You also bank skills on purpose. A quarterly resilience fair graduates people in pairs, every chef learns to solder. Every bike mechanic learns to braise greens. Every gardener learns basic radio. Every radio nerd learns to sharpen a knife without recriminations from the tomato. You make a who to ask. Poster welding, childcare, carpentry translation, conflict resolution, sign language so capacity isn't a rumour. You add small stipends or scrip because volunteering's cousin is burnout, and you can love your neighbours without asking them to be saints. For the long tail, you flirt with metal memories, a pocket steel card etched with the binder's table of contents, and the 2 phone numbers that matter most. A few tools wrapped in oiled cloth packed in a sealed tube and buried shallow under a distinctive rock because treasure maps are just backups with better branding. You write because you write down your passwords on paper in a safe the size of a fat book because you've learnt that I'll remember is a bedtime story and not the good kind. Debates keep your brows level. Historians still argue whether lost technologies like Roman concrete were truly lost, or just fell out of economic use until conditions and curiosity aligned again. Your takeaway is optimistic knowledge hibernates in libraries, ruins, and hobbies. Safeguards are alarm clocks. You don't need to rediscover everything. You need to remember what to fetch first. Finally, you plan the ritual that keeps planning alive. The quiet audit happens, each solstice candles on the table, the binder open, dates checked, batteries tested, fuel rotated, and one little ceremony where you retire something silly to the Museum of Bad Ideas. Light joke number 3 this year. The terracotta candle heater gets a plaque right next to the potato battery. Clever, cosy, catastrophically meh. You ring the skillet bell ribbon, not for magic but as a timer. When it stops, you're done soup on lids sealed, radios checked, and the microgridlet purring like a cat that respects electrical codes. None of this is doom choreography, it's comfort engineering. Safeguards shorten dark ages into dim evenings. Seed banks turn hunger into planning. Microgrids turn outages into naps. Radios turn rumour into voices with names. Paper turns panic into steps. Caches turn we should do something into we did, and here it is. And you dim the light, stroke the ribbon on the bell like it's a bookmark in a Karma chapter, and go to sleep knowing you've stashed ladders all along the staircase. If tomorrow wobbles, you'll climb. You ask the question. You've been circling like a cautious cat around a hot stove. Will the world ever truly reset to a caveman existence? You picture pelts, down flakes of fire that eats your eyebrows if you lean too close, in a sky with no flight paths, just constellations renamed by your street committee. Then you breathe and answer the way a good map does, with contours, not cartoons. First, the short, sleepy truth: a global, all-at-once fall to Paleolithic living is wildly unlikely. Knowledge is sticky. It clings to paper, to steel, to habit, to the stubborn way people hum while they fix things. Even after hard shocks, books remain books, bicycles remain miracle mules, and a pressure cooker does not devolve into a gourd just because the power blinked. You've already built ladders, sea drawers, Scriptorium nights, microgrids, radio check-ins, the gym turned council hall, and ladders are the opposite of falling forever. Zoom the lens, local resets, absolutely possible. Regions can skid down to low-tech for months or years. Storms, wars, ash politics with a taste for self-harm. But pockets of capacity survive and migrate. After Tambora, people still saved seed and wrote in diaries. After Blackout's, linemen in hard hats become folk heroes with clipboards. After pandemics, clinics reopen and the market table starts clipping script again. You don't need optimism with jazz hands, you need a memory with a schedule. Hold one mainstream fact for reassurance around the 1450s, Gutenberg's movable type press made copying fast, cheap and stubborn. When Europe later lurched through plagues, wars and fires, printed pages kept reappearing with infuriating persistence manuals, calendars, recipes, seditious pamphlets, psalters, and eventually the kind of books that teach you to pressure can tomatoes without offending physics. Printing proved that once knowledge multiplies, it resists extinction like dandelions in a polite lawn. Now your gentle caution if multiple big failures stack grid transformers cooked by space weather, logistic jammed by bad code crops, pinched by ash or heat rumour, outrunning radio, you could see longer shadows. That's why you built safeguards that don't ask permission. Islandable power, stored water and salt, paper instructions, tool libraries, and a neighbourhood that knows the difference between a whistle and a panic. Light joke number 1. Yes, the potato battery is still retired. No, it is not your backup inverter, though it remains a charismatic root vegetable with excellent PR. Remember the deep pattern you've stitched since section 1. Civilization isn't a castle, it's a campsite. You maintain rake, the coals mend the ropes, keep the fire ring tidy, write down where the water is, and make sure nobody sneaks crocodile dung sunscreen from the Museum of Bad Ideas into the first aid kit. The campsite resets when people leave. It thrives when people arrive with soup and rules. You have soup and rules. Tool chains matter. From charcoal and clay to bloom and blade, you proved that Stone Age is a skill gap, not a destiny. You can rebootstrap iron with neighbours, a bellows and a magnet pilfered from a speaker. You can apprentice each other into sewing, soldering, grafting and gears. You can turn a bicycle into a grain mill, a pump or a lathe, with a mood. You can in a pinch turn a gym into an althing, a repair cafe and a seed bank without ever once carving runes into a router. Like joke number 2, if you do carve runes into a router, make them say this is a coaster. So future archaeologists understand the ritual object they're holding. Meaning keeps pace, your little rites. Dusk whistles first jar day, the ribbon. On the skillet bell, keep danger small and decency large. Rituals anchored to tasks steer away from cliffs. The stories you choose are seatbelts for the mind, slow down, verify. Fix the process, thank the person who brought the right gasket. Historians still argue whether Rome fell in 476 transformed over centuries or simply moved its centre of gravity east and called itself Byzantine while tax receipts kept arriving. Your neighbourhood takes the actionable version of that debate call change by many names, if you must, but keep the receipts, the recipes and the rosters. Even navigation has ancestors you can borrow. Quirky tidbit for your pocket, traditional Marshallese stick, charts tapped oceansome motion swells, and island shadows with thin rods and shells, memory you could hold, training eyes to see patterns, the sea whispers, but never prints. You've been building stick charts of a different kind, corkboards, binders, radio nets, microgrids. They teach you to read the swells of rumour, the shadow of supply, the tide of neighbourly patience. Will there be places that break hard? Yes, there always have been. Will there be places that surprise you with competence? Also yes. Victory gardens once grew nearly half a nation's vegetables. Scriptoriums once kept letters legible. A single pump handle once stood between cholera and a neighbourhood. You are not special in your fragility. You are special in your ability to arrange memory, muscle and morale into a shape that looks suspiciously like resilience. The caveman fantasy sells 2 myths, that we could forget everything and that forgetting would somehow be simpler. You know better now. Simplicity worth having is earned, the kind with labels on breakers, dates on jars, knots that release and agreements that fit on a page. Light joke number 3 and socks, because civilization is at minimum warm feet and a plan not to step on Legos in the dark. So your answer lands like a hand on a kettle handle, firm, steady, slightly amused. No, the whole world is not resetting to caves. Yes, parts of the world can and will wobble sometimes dramatically. But people make ladders, they copy, teach, barter, write and weld, they keep museums of bad ideas so the next generation laughs instead of repeats. They put potatoes back where they belong on plates while radios murmur, seed drawers click, and a microgrid hums like a cat that respects fuses. You won't outrun every storm, you can shorten the night. And if one evening the router becomes a coaster again and the room gets that friendly hush, you'll already know the drill. Kettle on, candle set, breaker tagged, window taped, neighbour called, binder open to the page that starts as it always does with a small confident sentence. We remember how, or word count 1089. Wind down 300 words, let the pace loosen its grip. Now like laces untied after a long day. The room is dim and the shapes you've placed there kettle lantern. The little coil of cord on the table looks softer, almost shy. Outside the night does its patient ancient work and you don't need to supervise. You've already set the easy things in motion and put the heavier things to bed. Breathe in the ordinary clean cloth drying by the sink, the low thrum reel, or remembered of a battery that promises a quiet morning. The faint spice of something you canned when the sun was loud and generous. Picture the binder closed elastic around its middle like a book hugging itself. Picture the ribbon on the skillet bell, a small red smile in the dark. Picture the street relaxed, each door with its own little heartbeat of light, each window a square of calm. Let your mind step back from lists. They're still there, tidy and waiting, but they're not waving their arms anymore. The questions that had angles earlier have gone round and smooth. The big one, will we ever reset to cave shrinks to a simple soft answer that fits in the palm, we remember, we repair, we reach. You can set that answer on the nightstand like a glass of water there if you want it, fine on its own if you don't. Now breathe out slower, the air feels warmer, near the blanket's edge. The fan, if you turned it on, paints the room with an easy hush. Somewhere a late bicycle clicks past, chain whispering like a calm river. You don't have to hold the world in your hands tonight. You only have to be here breathing with the quiet knowledge that ladders are already leaned, where you'll need them, and that morning when it comes knows your name. Close your eyes. The kettle is off. The coals are safe. The list is asleep. You follow,